Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
In an expensive restaurant in the center of the city, it was not the first time that this couple was noticed. A young, well-groomed woman and a man of about the same age always occupied the same table in the farthest corner. The lady was always the first to arrive and was very nervous. Even from the outside, it was obvious that she was madly in love. What could not be said about her beau? He behaved completely calm and even somehow cold. The waiters argued about them every time. Some whispered that they were lovers, others that they were just friends, but none of them guessed the truth. Beatrice and Alex were not in a close relationship, though Beatrice tried hard to make it so, but she couldn't help it. He was completely indifferent to the woman. They met by chance at some banquet a few years ago. Alex had a solid, thriving business back then. He could afford everything he wanted: a nice house, an expensive car, restaurants, girls. In short, Alex lived luxuriously, without thinking about the future. Beatrice was from a very wealthy family, a rich heiress with a good education and upbringing, it would seem. Any man would be happy to meet such an enviable bride. But not Alex. He couldn't even explain himself why this person was so unpleasant to him. Alex tried in every possible way to avoid communication with her. Beatrice, having fallen in love with him from the first meeting, was looking for an excuse and an occasion to see him. When she called, she always invited him to this very place. She managed to persuade him to come in any way she could. Strangely enough, he couldn't refuse her for some reason. As if by inertia, they had dinner, talked about nothing, and then went in different directions again. Then Alex disappeared for a while. Now, when almost the whole town knew about the collapse of his business, Beatrice called again and offered to meet. Alex had been in no mood for several days, but Beatrice was very persistent, saying that there was an important matter. He decided that it would certainly not make his situation worse. He decided to come after all. As always, she arrived first and was already sitting at their table. "Hi," Beatrice said, smiling, and added, "I'm glad you agreed to meet. Let's order something and have lunch like we used to." The waiter who approached made a note of the wishes, and as soon as he stepped back, Beatrice said quietly, "You know, I've missed you very much. I've honestly tried to live without remembering you, but it doesn't work. I realize that you don't love me, but it's enough that I love you." Alex interrupted her abruptly and said rudely, "Well, how long can we go back to this? I've already told you 100 times. There can't be anything in common between us. If you called me because of that, then it was for nothing. Nothing has changed." He prepared to get up and go away, but Beatrice put her hand on his and said, "Wait a minute. I know you're in business trouble, and I want to help you. I have a rather strange proposal. You'll marry me and I'll pay off all your debts and keep giving you money to grow. I just thought that people live somehow without this love. They get used to each other. Alex's business was really deplorable. The business was simply falling apart. The partners who had been working with him for several years suddenly became almost enemies, interfering in every possible way, trying to take all the best for themselves. The deals Alex tried to make fell through one after another. To all other woes, the tax authorities took him on, and just the other day his accounts were arrested. In the struggle with all these hardships, he had no helpers, and he himself already understood perfectly well that he was failing, and it was virtually impossible to save the situation. It would seem that in this situation Beatrice made a very tempting offer. But Alex did not even want to think about such an option. He could not imagine that, having married, he would have to wake up and fall asleep in the same bed with this unpleasant lady. He did not like everything about her: her voice, her smile, her hair, her figure. Everything was not to his taste. Perhaps for financial gain he would have put up with her not so long ago. And it was such thoughts that had made him meet Beatrice, but not the desire to marry her. Alex sat silently looking at her and realized that even to save the business he would not do it. He was disgusted that a young wealthy woman suggested him to take such a crazy step without even thinking about his reputation. Rising from his chair, he took out a purse from his pocket and placing the note on the table, said indignantly, "Money for an order placed. And I'm sorry, I don't want to hear any more of this nonsense. Please try not to call me again. I don't need your help. I'll sort it out myself somehow." Alex turned round and left, and Beatrice silently continued to sit and stare after him with eyes full of tears. "Your order," she heard the waiter's voice nearby. As if waking up, Beatrice looked at the young man and, taking the money out of her purse, threw it on the table with the words, "Go to hell." The waiter put the plates on the table and in bewilderment began to collect the money, watching through the window as the lady who had run out tried to say something else to her beau with tears. But he took her hand away, got into a taxi and drove away, slamming the door. Less than a month after this meeting, Alex lost everything because of incredible debts. Everything possible had been taken away from him. His business had completely collapsed. His flat, his car, everything had gone to the bank where he had borrowed money for development. All he had left was his grandfather's old house a few kilometers outside the city. He hadn't been there for a long time, but he remembered well how, as a child, he was brought there and left there for holidays. All day long he used to run around the village with the neighboring boys, stealing apples and plums from other people's gardens, and then swimming heartily in the river. Mr. Oliver's grandfather was then a forester, and often took his grandson with him on his rounds. They wandered for hours, and his grandfather taught him how to navigate the terrain, pick berries, and understand mushrooms. Alex loved this time immensely and always looked forward to the holidays. Since his grandfather died, it happened 5 years ago, Alex never came to the village again. But now, when there was nothing to keep him in the city, he decided to settle down in his grandfather's house and went to the remote village. What was his disappointment when he was met with a dilapidated house and an overgrown plot. The building, which had stood without an owner for so many years, needed repair, and Alex, having no extra money, began to slowly do everything himself. His grandfather had all the necessary tools in the shed, and on the first day he outlined a plan. It was necessary to patch the leaky roof over the porch, to fix the fallen fence, to strengthen the steps at the entrance. But the first thing Alex started with was a general cleanup. Having thrown out all the unnecessary junk, he washed the windows to a shine, so did the floor, and thanks to the marvelous sunny weather, he dried all the laundry. "I wonder myself," he thought, doing all this as if he had been doing it all his life, though even the cleaning in his house had always been done by the housekeeper. By the evening of the first day, he fell asleep on the bed right on top of the made-up bedspread. Over the next few days, he slowly got everything in relative order, and even finding a few cans of old paint in the shed, freshened up the fence. The locals only chuckled at this. Purely urban found. He won't last long. Grandfather said that his grandson had become a rich man. "What brings him here?" the grandmothers whispered to him. But Alex was not going to leave. There was only one problem. There was not much money left, and they were running out, and it was not easy to find a job in this wilderness. Having heard from his neighbors that somewhere on the other side of the village a farmer needed a worker, he decided to take a risk. He had no idea how and what he would do, but he went there. The farmer was a young woman, about his age, short, with a long braid. She was like a beauty from an old fairy tale. Camila, that was her name, asked who he was and what he could do. When she learnt that Alex was a city dweller, she looked at him appraisingly and said, "I don't know if you can do this kind of work, but there is a lot of work to be done, and men's hands are needed everywhere." Alex, realizing that he had little choice, there was no other work in the village, began to ask for a chance. "All right," the farmer said somehow, doomedly still. "There's no cue for me yet. Let's see what you can do." His duties were to drive the cows to a special pasture and clean the barn and do other work on the farm. On the first day, when she saw Alex clumsily shoveling manure, Camila laughed and said, "Sweet mate, you'll be cleaning one cow for 2 days like that. Give me the tool. I'll try to teach it. Maybe it will still work." She easily took the shovel from his hands and began to deftly push the manure onto the conveyor belt moving along the edge. She did it so easily that she cleaned the whole corner in a few minutes. Alex marveled at how much strength this frail woman had. and Camila turned round and, smiling, handed back the shovel. This is how it should be done, several times a day. The cowshed must be perfectly clean, because this is the main requirement for quality products, the farmer said and left. It took Alex a long time to adjust to this new job. Camila came to see him several times during the day, and he showed that he was not at all bothered by it. In fact, Alex felt like every muscle in his body ached from the experience. At lunchtime, noticing that he was sitting on the sidelines, leaning against the wall of the barn, the landlady asked, "Didn't you even take a snack? Is it possible to live with such labor without food? You'll die on the first day." She quickly headed towards the house, and after a couple of minutes she brought out a liter can of milk and a rather large piece of bread. Alex tried to refuse, but Camila didn't even want to listen to anything, literally ordered, "I don't be stupid, you won't make it to the end of the day. What do I care about milk? And this is an exception. Don't worry, I won't feed you every day." She took off her handkerchief from her head and laid it on a log and sat down beside it. After a little silence, Camila began to ask him how he had come to their land, how long he had been here. Having satisfied his hunger a little, Alex thanked her and tried to tell in brief everything about business, about unscrupulous partners, credits, debts, and confiscation of everything he had gained. Of course, he omitted the most important thing that he realized too late. After all, the main fault was only his non-serious attitude to business. Constant partying and mindless spending of money could not lead to anything good, but he presented it to Camila as if all the rival jealous competitors had ruined the business. She listened in silence, then sighed and said sadly, "Yes, business is hard work. I myself, when I started, I thought we'd raise the farm in no time. Not with my Gregory. He's my late husband, God forgive me, and he was an alcoholic. When we married, it was love. I didn't even notice his illness." She could see that she could hardly hold back her tears. Her voice trembled, but after a moment's silence, Camila continued, "I thought we'd have a good life. But I had to do it all myself. Gregory started drinking almost from the wedding. He was hard on the arm, the bastard. I was ashamed to walk around the village with bruises all over me. I couldn't give birth to a child because of that bastard. That was my life." She was silent, and Alex asked quietly, "And what happened to him?" Camila brushed away a tear and, already standing up, answered, "My Gregory died. He got drunk on our lorry and flew off the bridge behind the village. As the doctors said, instant death from a blow to the head. So I became a widow." She added in a perfectly calm voice, as if this confession had never happened, "Well, let's go to work. I think we'll have time to talk. You and I are like colleagues in misfortune, failed businessmen." She smiled and walked towards the house. Alex sat for a while thinking about this conversation. He was sympathetic to the hostess, but he tried to drive such thoughts away from him. He didn't care about personal relationships right now. He had to keep his job at all costs. After all, he had to live on something in this wilderness. Alex's first working days were like hard labor. He had to get up at 5:30 in order to be at the farm by 5. For him, who was used to lying in bed until 10 a.m., all the last years it seemed unbearable, but it was a small thing compared to the hard work. A whole day on his feet, regardless of the weather conditions. At the end of the first day, Camila, who saw the bloody calluses on his hands, sadly remarked, "Well, businessman, I'm afraid you won't be coming to see me tomorrow. It's hard work for you, isn't it?" Alex, however, only smiled tiredly and said, "But can I leave you, Camila? We are now, as you say, colleagues in misfortune, since I've ruined my business. I will try to help at least yours." He saw gratitude in the woman's eyes, but trying to restrain her emotions, she said gravely, "Well, we'll see. If you come tomorrow, then we'll work together. If not, then it's not fate. You stay here. I'll bring out the ointment. My grandmother taught me how to make it. Everything that hurts will go away, and you'll wake up as good as new." The ointment did ease the pain a little, and he slept that night without even waking up. In the morning, when he got to the farm, Camila said cheerfully, "Well, that's great. And I thought you couldn't stand it. Well, then we'll work together." As they say, it's hard only the first few days, then you get used to it. Alex really began to get used to it little by little. Gradually, the calluses on his hands went away, and his back didn't hurt as much as in the first days. He saw how Camila was struggling to keep her business afloat, but it was clear that it was not very profitable. Such a business needed experienced male hands, and how could he, a native city dweller, help? Nevertheless, the farmer remained his senior mentor, if it was necessary to suggest something and help. After that first conversation about their business problems, they even became friends. Alex surprised himself. He even started to like it all. He was happy to help in any way he could. At the same time, he was not attracted to noisy companies, restaurants, and other attributes of a rich life. It was pleasant for him to sit in the courtyard in the evening after work, discussing plans for the next day. And at such moments, he did not want to go anywhere at all. And if they were quite satisfied with such a relationship, the villagers thought quite differently. Every now and then, Camila would hear another gossip, and she would share it with Alex, laughing. Can you imagine? I went to the shop, and the women there started to tell me about you, so to speak, to open my eyes. You, it turns out, are a city businessman and came to snatch my farm from me, almost ready to marry me, only to become a full owner of my birch trees. Are you really such a con artist? Alex smiled and, taking Camila's hand, said, About getting married, maybe not too far off, but please, not for the sake of it. Especially, believe me, I know a thing or two. You still have to invest in your farm to get something out of it. At that moment, he noticed Camila's first confusion and, blushing, gently removed her palm from his hand. It seemed to him as if both of them had been given a mild electric shock. He barely restrained himself from pulling her against his chest. Camila, as if sensing the same thing, quickly turned around and went into the house. During that day, she never came near him again, though Alex saw her appearing in the yard now and then, doing some business of her own. At night, he almost did not sleep, and having hardly waited for the morning, went to the field, which was almost right behind his house, for a huge bouquet of wildflowers. Alex went to work. Camila was already in the cowshed, and he, holding out the bouquet, surprised at himself, said confusedly, I don't know how to say it right, but I haven't slept a whole night, and I realized that I want to be with you every minute. It was really the first time he had ever torn wildflowers. The first time he had ever been lost when he suggested to a woman that they should be together. His life had changed. She smiled and, smelling the flowers, said quietly, You know, I haven't slept either, and I wouldn't mind at all if you moved in with me. As they say, we'll live and see. Those words seemed to give Alex courage. He came to her immediately and kissed her, embracing her. They stood embraced for a long time, and Alex felt especially warm and good for the first time in a while. From that day on, they were together. Alex packed his things, and in the evening he moved to Camila's house on the farm. They had become very close to each other. Camila turned out to be a wonderful hostess. Everything was easy for her. The house was clean, cozy. She cooked beautifully and managed to manage the household. Alex tried to help her in every possible way. They seemed to be completely from different worlds, but he felt very good with her. Alex gradually learned everything he had to do on the farm. He could easily and quickly clean the cowsheds, cut grass if necessary, fix a broken fence, and many other things that any countryman should be able to do. They lived quietly and well. Even their detractors left them alone and stopped inventing gossip. One evening, having done all the chores, he and Camila were about to have dinner when she suddenly turned pale and settled down on the kitchen table. Alex frightenedly rushed to fetch water and, quickly filling a mug, held it out to her. My darling, what's the matter with you? In a voice trembling with excitement, he asked quietly. Camila sat with her eyes covered, and after a moment answered in a weak voice. Yes, something has become unwell. Don't worry, it'll pass now. I've been feeling sick for a couple of days now. I should probably get to the hospital somehow. I thought it would go away on its own. And here it comes again. Alex picked her up in his arms and carried her to the bed. Then, without saying a word, quickly left the house. He knew that next door lived a grandmother who had worked as a paramedic for many years. She was often called upon for help when the present doctors could not help. Mrs. Chloe, that was the neighbor's name, very quickly, without a word, gathered herself up and followed him. She was about 80 years old, but despite her advanced age, she was still quite alert. After examining Camila, she turned to Alex and smiling, said, "Well, I could be wrong, of course, but it's nothing serious. But you are expecting a new addition to your house. Camila is expecting a baby, but it is necessary to go to the hospital anyway." He looked at his beloved and saw tears of happiness in her eyes. After seeing his neighbor off, he sat down on the edge of the bed and started kissing her hands. "Camila, my dear, you are good, my favorite. We are going to have a baby. I love you so much. So tomorrow we'll go to the clinic. I have to be sure that everything will be fine with you and the baby." They lay cuddled together for a long time, and Alex thought he could even hear the heartbeat of a little life. Once again, he was surprised at how much he was enjoying the change in his life. He was really happy and really wanted a real family with Camila, with lots of kids. The next day at the clinic, where they went for a checkup, they were surprised again. The young doctor, after all the examinations, invited them into the office and with a smile said, "Well, you are really pregnant. Besides, I must make you happy. You will have 2 babies at once. Well, or babies, it is impossible to determine yet. But the next time you come to us, you will definitely be able to find out." The doctor gave some more recommendations and set a time for the next visit. Alex and Camila drove back with their arms around each other. They both had a happy smile on their faces. Only when they crossed the threshold of the house, Alex picked up his beloved in his arms and began to twirl her around. Camila laughed and, hugging him by the neck, shouted, "Let me go, Stray. How I have long dreamed of a child, and here are 2 at once." They were really very happy. And now Alex tried to double protect Camila, not letting her do hard work. He was ready to do everything for her to bear and give birth to healthy babies. The pregnancy went well and Camila felt fine. There were a couple of times when she felt a little sick, but she decided not to talk about it. On the appointed day, they went to the appointment again, confident that everything was fine and expecting only positive emotions. But life ordered differently. Instead of joyful news, they were shocked with a terrible diagnosis. Everything was normal with the babies. It turned out they were to have 2 sons. But Camila was diagnosed with health problems. The same doctor said, "If Camila doesn't have an operation soon, she won't survive herself, and she won't be able to bear the babies. As long as the disease is not neglected yet, surgical intervention is urgently needed. But it costs a lot of money. Unfortunately, it is done only in one regional clinic, and that for a fee." Alex interrupted her without listening. "I'll find any money, no matter how much it costs. Tell me exactly how much I need and where to go when." The doctor wrote on a piece of paper torn out of her notebook the address where such operations are performed, and on the other side the amount needed. Seeing a multi-digit number, Alex was confused at first, but immediately, having come to his senses, almost whispered, "I will definitely find the money, and Camila and the kids will live." They did not have such a sum, of course, but he was almost sure that he could manage. The very next day he went into town and started contacting everyone he knew. But all his former so-called friends said they couldn't help him. Some of them had just returned from holiday, having spent almost everything. Others explained that money should work, so everything was invested in business. Alex was about to fall into despair when suddenly he stopped like a stumbling block. An expensive foreign car stopped right in front of him at the door of a medical clinic. The woman behind the wheel seemed very familiar to him. There could be no doubt it was Beatrice. Alex rushed to the car and opened the door in front of her. "Beatrice, hi. Do you recognize me?" She looked at him squeamishly at first, of course. In a man slightly unshaven, in a cheap jacket and jeans, it was hard to recognize a once successful businessman. But then suddenly her eyes glistened with tears, and jumping out of the car, she threw herself on his neck. "Alex, Alex, my darling, where have you been all this time?" she whispered. Then, suddenly pulling away, she spoke quickly, my darling, don't go anywhere. I begged you. I'll run to the clinic for a minute. I'll give out instructions, and we'll go to the restaurant as before." She came back very quickly indeed, and in half an hour they were already sitting in a familiar restaurant. Alex looked around sadly. Almost nothing had changed in the place during that time. When the waiter who came up to them prepared to write down the order, he said, "Just a cup of tea for me, please, no sugar." The young man looked at him in surprise, then at Beatrice, and the latter, smiling, said, "He's joking. So we'll have 2 prawn salads, 2 baked trout, and a bottle of some good wine, please." When the waiter stepped away, she put her hand on Alex's palm and said quietly, "Don't worry, I'm paying for everything. Can I finally treat the man I've loved for so many years? Tell me, how are you? Where are you? What do you do?" Alex didn't want to tell, or rather, he didn't know where to start. He saw very well that Beatrice was still doing well financially, and remembering how she treated him, he decided to ask for help. Without going into details, he told her about the farm, Camila, her pregnancy, and the terrible diagnosis she had received. Beatrice listened attentively, then offered him a drink to the meeting, and then said, "You know, I'm the owner of the very clinic we met at. By the way, we recently started to do this kind of surgery. Quite successfully, I tell you. I lured a good specialist. Now we have patients traveling to us from other regions." Alex's heart raced. He couldn't believe such luck. In a voice trembling with excitement, he said, "I beg you, help Camila. We don't have that kind of money, of course, but if necessary, I can write a receipt and I'll pay it all back in installments. Only please help me." Beatrice looked at him carefully and, taking the glass in her hand again with the expensive ring on her finger, said, "Come on, Alex, don't worry. How can I refuse you? I will definitely help you. In the meantime, let's just eat our favorite dishes and talk, and then we'll get down to business." They sat for over an hour, talking about completely different topics. But all Alex had on his mind was Camila and the desire to help her sooner rather than later. When at last the waiter brought coffee, Beatrice suddenly said, "We're not going to talk business with you here, but I do have a proposition. I hope you won't refuse me. Now we'll go to the car and there we'll decide what to do with your Camila." Alex was willing to do anything to get her help. But what Beatrice offered was unbelievable even for him. Once inside the interior of the expensive car, Beatrice lit a cigarette and, without looking at him, began to speak. "I seem to have everything well, even say, ideal, a good clinic, a thriving business, a large country house. Everything you want, you can buy. Only one thing is missing: happiness. I tried to build a family. But what kind of family is there without children? And that's exactly what I can't have. I've done everything I could wherever I was treated, even when abroad for help. But, alas, the diagnosis cannot be appealed. I am childless." Beatrice nervously took a few puffs and continued, "And then I met you. And here's what I thought. You don't have any money anyway, and you have nowhere to get it. I don't even dream that you'll ever give it away on your village earnings. Raising 2 little ones on their own 2 feet is a costly business too. And so I have a proposition for you personally, which even your sweetheart must not know about." Beatrice offered to give Camila the operation free of charge, then to watch her in her clinic throughout her pregnancy, and in return he would give one of his sons to her when he was born. Seeing that Alex was shocked by such an offer, she stroked his arm affectionately and added quietly, "You don't worry, yours won't find out anything. To be more precise, after the operation she will be informed that she should be monitored and give birth here. And then it's a matter of technique. When the baby arrives, Mum will be informed that one of them turned out to be weak and died in labor. It happens. Well, she'll cry, she'll get over it, and you'll raise the second one, as if he was the only one." Alex listened to Beatrice as if in a nightmare. He did not want to believe it, but she persistently gave more and more arguments. Feeling completely confused, he weighed all the pros and cons and agreed, trying to justify his action somehow. Alex thought about the fact that all this was done to save his beloved. They really had no other way out. They had nowhere to get the necessary amount of money. Beatrice was not deceived. Indeed, a couple of days later, Camila was admitted to her clinic. After conducting all the necessary examinations, she underwent surgery. To all Camila's questions where he got the money for such an expensive facility, he only guffawed. "I don't think about it. Consider that I sold my kidney for your sake." He himself tried not to make eye contact. He was painfully ashamed of what he had agreed to. But seeing how much better she felt after the operation, he calmed down. The remaining 2 months before the birth, Camila felt well, and Alex even began to forget about the agreement with Beatrice. They lived in perfect harmony, taking care of each other and dreaming about how they would raise the twins. At such moments, Alex wanted to believe that he was dreaming about the contract with Beatrice, and that no one would ever take their child away. When the time came to give birth, however, Beatrice reminded him of herself. Camila was admitted to the clinic, and on the due date she gave birth to 2 beautiful boys. The happy mom had no idea what awaited her next. And when in the morning she was brought only one of them for feeding, she asked in bewilderment, "Where's the other one? When do we feed them in turn? Please bring him. Let him lie next to her." The elderly nurse went out after putting the baby down. Camila sat on the bed, holding her son in her arms. After a minute, as if she had come to her senses, she ran out into the corridor and ran up to the post nurse, screaming, "Where's my second child? Bring him to me right now. I demand to see my second son." Beatrice came out of the resident's room and, after asking to give Camila a sedative, took her to the ward. There, after putting her to bed, she informed her that one of the boys had died and that she should be glad that at least the second had survived. Camila could not believe what she had heard and continued to demand that she give up the baby. Then, after realizing what had happened, she fell into a severe depression. She did not want to live, even for the sake of the one who remained alive. There was a second child left. Alex began to come less and less often, explaining that he was busy with the house and the household. He said he was preparing everything for his return. And she believed him until one day she overheard 2 nurses talking. They were having tea in the canteen, unaware that she was going out into the corridor, and one said to the other, "Well, the woman in labor in the 6th with her husband is completely out of her mind. I myself saw him leave his wife several times and get into the car with ours." Camila immediately realized that the conversation was about her and Alexa, only she didn't know who R was. After all, she was the only one in Ward 6, so there was no doubt. Camila stood holding her breath at the dining room door, trying to hear everything. The second nurse, sipping her tea, decided to keep the conversation going. "Don't talk. No shame, no conscience. Poor little thing. Not only did she lose one baby, but her husband turned out to be a traitor. Do you think he's in love with our main girl? I bet he's meeting her for her wealth. Why does she have a lot of money? So he decided to get attached somehow." Tears flowed down Camila's cheeks. Returning to the ward, she saw nothing in front of her. Resentment and pain were overwhelming her soul. She lay there for a whole day, refusing even to feed the baby. But then she came to her senses and, having calmed down, took her son after all. The elderly nurse nodded approvingly and quietly said, "Well done. The child is not guilty of anything. You, my dear, have postpartum depression. It will pass, and you will live as before and raise your son." But Camila had already decided for herself that she would not live like before. Waiting for Alex to come to visit, Camila, holding back her tears, said to him quite unexpectedly, "I know all about your affair with that lady. I'm being discharged tomorrow, so I don't want your spirit in my house, and don't you dare visit your son. You are no longer in our lives. Go away." Having said that, she covered her face with her hands and could not hold back her tears. Alex, not even trying to justify himself, at that moment just didn't know what to say in response. After all, while Camila was in the clinic, he had indeed met Beatrice several times. It didn't even occur to him that he was losing the dearest person in his life. And as he leaves, he makes another unforgivable mistake. The next day, Camila was discharged, and she, holding her son in her arms, went, not understanding where. She wandered the streets of the city for several hours, tears flowing down her cheeks. When it was time to feed the baby, Camila sat down on a bench in the park. As the baby lapped at her little lips, a terrible plan was born in her mind. She had once supplied milk to an orphanage, and at that moment she remembered it. After waiting until her son had eaten, she got up quite calmly and went to the known address. She left the boy right on the porch. It was already evening, and there were no witnesses. Without another tear, Camila drove home. She didn't remember how she got to the village. But when she saw that Alex had taken his things, it was as if she had relived the betrayal. She cried all night, and all the next day she couldn't even think about anything, let alone do anything. A few weeks went by like that. Alex never showed up. It was as if Camila didn't live, but existed. The depression didn't let up. On one of those days when her soul became very dreary, she put on clean clothes and went to the bridge where her husband's lorry had driven off. She had already decided everything for herself. She had lost her children. Her beloved had betrayed her. Standing on the edge of the iron structure, she was ready to end it all. Camila was ready to jump down when suddenly her wrist was grabbed by someone's warm hand, and a woman's voice said, Now, my good fellow. How can you do that? It won't solve all the problems. And what a sin. Come gently to me. Camila turned round and immediately recognized her grandmother, who was a witch doctor in the village. She helped many people with simple potions and herbs. Here she was by chance. Returning from the forest, she gently pulled Camila by the arm. The woman followed her, completely unwillingly. On the way, the woman kept talking, urging her to put bad thoughts out of her head and to go on living, no matter what. Her voice made Camila feel calm and warm. She returned home completely different, deciding not to remember the past, plunged back into the cares of the farm. She began to work round the clock to restore it, from morning until late in the evening to exhaustion, trying to distract herself from unnecessary thoughts and memories. Several years flew by completely unnoticed. Camila hardly remembered Alex anymore. She had cut him out of her life. The same could not be said of him. He, who had once escaped from rural poverty, remembered that happy time more and more often every day. Back at the clinic, he was even glad that Camila had kicked him out. After all, it was hard for him to live on and lie all the time, especially knowing her character. Alex was sure that she would not forgive him under any circumstances. Beatrice was very happy about their separation, and she persuaded Alex to move in with her. After all, Alex is as much your son as the one who stayed with Camila, and has the right to live with his father, she persuaded Alex. It still wasn't pleasant. Alex, as he had once been so many years ago, was not particularly eager. He did, after all, settle in her huge country house and began to help with the baby. They lived without feelings or any kind of commitment. Sometimes it seemed to Alex that they lived as complete strangers to each other, but in time he even began to get used to it. The love that Beatrice had once felt for him disappeared somewhere, and she treated him as a free appendix to her son. At the same time, the child's upbringing was her own, indulging his every whim. The boy grew up completely uncontrollable, and Alex could not do anything about it. "Do you realize that you will raise him a spoiled major?" he said indignantly to Beatrice after she had thrown a party at an expensive restaurant on her son's birthday. "What did you want him to do? Twist cows' tails like his brother?" "Terrence is my son, and he'll have everything he wants," she hissed, making sure no one was around. Alex had already come to terms with Beatrice's attitude towards her son and herself. But when the boy turned 16, the irreparable happened, once again fulfilling the whims of the child. Beatrice gave him a mope. Alex, in indignation, tried to stop her before the purchase. "Do you realize he's too young to play with such toys? He could get hurt or crushed." But Beatrice wouldn't even listen to him. And Alex's words turned out to be prophetic. Just a month after his birthday, Terrence jumped out on his mope on the road right under the wheels of a multi-ton cement truck. He died immediately, without even regaining consciousness. And Beatrice's life with Alex was divided into before and after. For the first few weeks, Alex drank nonstop. He was consumed by guilt and regret. Regret that he had once agreed to separate the children, that he had abandoned Camila in a difficult moment, and that in the end he had not kept his son safe. Beatrice, on the other hand, having recovered a little after the funeral, had completely changed towards Alex, becoming rigid and imperious. Sometimes it seemed to him that she did not regard him as a man at all, and it was surprising how she did not throw him out of the house. Though for her he had become like a servant. Their communication was reduced only to commands and demands on her part to do something. They hardly spoke anymore. Beatrice turned to him only when she needed something. One day Alex remembered that he had once found solace in gambling. Without saying anything, he took money from his home safe and went to an establishment he knew. At that moment he thought that she would not lose money, and he, distracted, would win and pay it all back. On the first night he was indeed lucky. He won so much that he put back what he had taken and still had some left over. Having realized that it helps to distract himself from sad thoughts about his failed life, he became a regular at almost all gambling clubs and underground establishments in the city. Everywhere, however, he was less and less lucky in the game. And one day, having lost a huge sum, he was forced to borrow at high interest from a very dangerous man. He had heard that this moneylender was very harsh in case of non-payment of the debt and could cripple him, if not kill him. But he hoped to get even. Fortune had turned its back on Alex, and when he couldn't find the necessary sum of money on the due date, the moneylender found him himself. "So I see you don't understand normal language," he began to say through gritted teeth when he met Alex at the door of an establishment, and continued, "I know everything about you, everything about your secrets, and believe me, I can make your life unbearable." Then he looked at Alex with a look that made Alex break out in a cold sweat, and pronouncing each word clearly, he said, "What can I take from you, though? Your wife has all the money. She seems to be a businesswoman. We'll take it all from her. But I won't leave you alone either, just so you know." Alex didn't know what to do next, but he couldn't go back to Beatrice. He decided to stay with an old acquaintance for a while and went to the other side of the city. Of course, he was not particularly welcome, because for a long time he never once remembered this person. But nevertheless, he was accepted. The acquaintance lived with his elderly mother in a 3-room flat and gave the guest a small room. All night Alex did not sleep, thinking what to do next, and in the morning he decided to go to Beatrice and tell her about everything. After listening to him, she said sharply, "Are you mad? You have made a mess of things and I have to deal with it. It's expensive for me to sort things out too, so deal with your own problems and try not to be in my life anymore." Alex left the office completely lost, walked on his own, not realizing where he was going. Once in the city park, he wandered around the alleys for a long time, trying to think of some plan of his rescue. Turning around a few times, he thought he saw a familiar face, but realized that it simply couldn't be. He continued walking onward. As he sat down on one of the benches, he saw out of the corner of his eye that a young man with a limp, whom he had seen several times before, was sitting off to the side and was clearly watching him. Once again, Alex looked at the guy unnoticed, and there was no doubt in his mind. He looked like 2 drops of water to the dead Terence. His heart raced. Alex realized that the young man was obviously watching him. But what did he need it for? It was unclear. Having gathered his resolve, he got up sharply and walked briskly towards the guy. The guy was confused, but he didn't have time to do anything. "Who are you? And why are you following me? Are you unwell?" Alex asked. "Did Camila send you? Did she tell you who I am?" Now he didn't doubt for a second that it was his son who had once stayed with Camila at the clinic. The boy looked at him strangely somehow and asked in surprise, "Camila who? What are you talking about?" "I don't know any Camila." He pulled Alex's photo out of his jacket pocket and holding it out, continued, "I was hired to keep an eye on you. I'm a private debt collector and I was supposed to find out as much as I could about you and make you pay off your debt. Well, or demand that it be paid by someone else for you." Alex sat down next to me on the bench and, holding back tears, said, "Well, do you know you're my son? I don't even doubt it." Alex told everything about him and Camila, about his relatives, about the quarrel. At the same time, he did not mention that there were 2 babies born. He talked and cried. Jasper, that was the guy's name, sat there as if he couldn't believe what was happening and listened. At one point, he interrupted Alex and asked sharply, "So, how did you recognize me? If I take it you last saw me at the maternity hospital." The question caught Alex off guard, but then he spoke quickly. "So you look a lot like your mother, and there's even a birthmark. It's exactly like hers." He saw Jasper's face stiffen as he spoke. He was staring off into the distance and clenched his fists as if preparing to strike when he paused. Alex suddenly said quietly, "Son, stay out of this dirty business. Why would you do that? Beating money out of debtors is no good." Jasper suddenly jumped up from the bench and, looking at him angrily, began to shout. "So much business, you say? Leaving your wife and child is a pretty business, and in all these years not even trying to see me. Is that even okay?" Jasper literally glared at him and continued, "Did you know, Father, that I've spent my entire life in an orphanage? I'm young, but with a limp like this, I can't get a decent job or meet a girl. You think that's a life? I want a different one, a normal one, like everyone else's. So they promised to help me with the operation in exchange for following you." The document he'd been holding all this time fell to the bench. Jasper said doomfully, "Did I really think my employer's debtor would be my own father? What does that change, though? You owe it, so you'll pay it back. And I'm not going to let it go. First, write down the address where my mother lives. I have to meet her." Alex quickly took the sheet from his son's hands and wrote down from memory where Camilla's farm was, holding out the address. He said quietly, "I'm sorry, son, if you can. You're right, of course, right about everything." But Jasper wasn't listening to him anymore. Snatching the sheet out of his hands, he headed for the park exit. Alex sat there for a while longer, his hands powerlessly lowered, and then suddenly he said quietly, "I'll get even, son. I'll definitely get even, that's all. The money will be back tomorrow morning." The money in his pockets was not at all for playing at the club. That's why Alex, having looked regretfully at the gold watch given to Beatrice in the first year, went to the pawn shop. It was the last thing he had of any value left. It wouldn't be enough to pay his debt to the supplier anyway, but it would be enough for a couple of games at the club. He'd spent the whole night in one of the underground establishments, winning and losing, hoping to make a big score. But luck, it seems, was not going to return to him. In the morning he went out into the street without a single ruble in his pocket and with a debt to the moneylender. For a moment he remembered Camila. Perhaps she would help him with the money, or at least he could sit there for a while without money even for a ticket. Alex, shifting from hitchhiker to hitchhiker, drove to the village. He couldn't even imagine that he wasn't the only one aiming for the farm that morning. The first thing he saw as he approached the house was Beatrice's car. Alex did not yet know why she had come to this wilderness, but his heart was already anxiously clenched. He stood at the gate for a long time, hesitating to enter, but then he went to the house. Camila was sitting at the dining table with her hands over her face. She was sobbing bitterly. Beatrice sat opposite with a nonchalant look, saying, "I deceived you then, and your husband helped me in it. Your second son did not die then." They both didn't see him in the dark corridor, and Alex continued to stand and listen. "He and I made a deal. I was to do your labor operation for free, and he was to play along with me on the dead baby story. You know, Terrence was a beautiful boy. I really did love him very much." Alex stood, barely restraining himself from lashing out at Beatrice. He had never expected such meanness from her. At that moment there was a knock on the door behind him. Jasper appeared on the threshold. "What are you doing here?" he said angrily, stepping towards Alex. Jasper stepped up close to him and, taking him by the collar of his jacket, continued, "You know, if I didn't know you were my dad, I'd totally punch you in the face. That's what they used to do to traitors like you in our orphanage." The women came out of the room at the noise. Beatrice was the first to settle into a chair by the door. Terrence can't be so much like Terrence. Camila, realizing all at once, fell on her knees and, wrapping her arms around Jasper's legs, began to sob and wail. "My dear son, I'm sorry, I'm a fool. I didn't want to live. And then I was afraid to look for you, thinking you must have been adopted. I'm sorry, sweetheart." Jasper took her by the shoulders and, lifting her gently, said, "I don't blame you, I understand. But I don't want to see that scoundrel. I don't know what Terrence was talking about. Did I have a sibling?" Alex swore to himself that, whatever it cost him, he had to sort out his debts first, and then think about how to beg forgiveness from Camila and his son. It was as if something in him had snapped. When he returned to the city, he found the moneylender himself and was able to persuade him to allow him to repay the debt in installments. Surprisingly, the moneylender agreed. The friend he had stayed with a couple of days ago agreed to let him back into the same room for a reasonable fee, and even helped him with a job. Alex got a job as a loader. And on the first evening, when he returned with severe pain in his arms and lower back, he regretfully thought that painkillers would be very useful. Realizing that it would take him a long time to pay back his debt from one salary, Alex took any part-time job. He surprised himself. He slept literally 4 hours a day and worked the rest of the time. Sometimes it seemed that he couldn't stand it and would give up everything. But he remembered how painful and hard he had made it for Camila and Jasper, and he went on with his life again at the same pace. Now he had someone and something to do it for. Soon, with difficulty but having paid off all his debts, he was back in the village again. Standing for a long time in front of the house, as if afraid to enter, he knocked timidly. He entered, but no one was there. Alex went out and sat down on the bench where they had once discussed their plans with Camila. He remembered every detail, how good they had been together at that time, and tears slowly flowed down his cheeks. At that moment, Camila and her son came in the gate, talking cheerfully about something. Seeing him, and in such a state, they stopped, and Jasper said sharply, "Why have you come here? You don't seem to be welcome here. Let's go on ahead and get out." But Camila, touching his arm, said quietly, "Why do you do that? It is your father, after all. Come, let's not give the neighbors something to gossip about." They talked for a very long time, remembering the past, and Alex begged her to forgive him. He fully realized his guilt, and if Jasper took it somehow wary, Camila smiled her enchanting smile and said quietly, "Well, let's give it a try. We are each other's kin." They really began to live a completely new life, as if from scratch. Alex and Camila decided that they had already wasted a lot of time, immediately legalized their relationship as husband and wife, and plunged headlong into taking care of the farm. And soon things really started to pick up. At first, Jasper lived in town, but on one of his visits, Alex timidly said, "Son, why don't you quit this town? The job of a collector is too nerve-wracking, too risky. Maybe we should all do windows together. It's our family business now, after all." His mom immediately supported him, and Jasper was surprisingly quick to agree. At first, his parents didn't even realize that his agreement was not because of their suggestion, but for another reason entirely. It was only a couple of weeks after the move, when he introduced them to Vanessa, that they realized who he had come here for. The girl was the granddaughter of the very Mrs. Chloe Fieldred who had once told Camila she was pregnant. Her grandmother had died a few years ago, and Vanessa had moved into her house. After graduating from medical school, she followed in her grandmother's footsteps, treating people. Business at the firm was getting better and better every day. Camila and Alex were able to pay for their son's surgery without going into debt, and soon Vanessa was helping him recover. Jasper gladly followed her instructions and learned to walk as if he were walking again, no longer limping. When he was well, one day at dinner he said, "Mom, Dad, we have to go to my brother's grave. I want you to come with me." I made arrangements with Vanessa for tomorrow, and she agreed. Beatrice gave me the address then. The next morning they all walked in silence through the cemetery, each thinking about his own thoughts. When they found the grave, Beatrice was already sitting on it. She had changed a great deal, grown old. When she saw them coming, she said fearfully, "I'm sorry, I'll be leaving now." I couldn't stand it. Even though it was not my own blood, I still raised her. Rising from her knees, she was about to leave and suddenly, flaring up angrily, said, "You can be calm. There is a God after all. I am punished to the full. My son, though not my own, is dead. My beloved, who never loved me, is happy again with another. And I'm out of business. My clinic went under. My house is in foreclosure. I've had it for all my sins," Beatrice said bitterly, and walked towards the exit from the cemetery. Alex and Camila approached the grave in silence. Tears flowed down their cheeks, and, not holding back her sobs, Camila said, "Sonny, my darling, I haven't even seen you properly. I'm sorry." She ran her hand over the photograph on the monument, which showed the face of a young man who looked exactly like Jasper. Vanessa, however, seeing how worried her lover was, squeezed his hand and whispered, "I was going to tell you later, but I think now this news can calm Mom down. You and I are having triplets." Jasper turned to her, not believing what he heard, and in a voice trembling with excitement asked in the same whisper, "What, I'm having 3 sons? 3 whole sons?" Vanessa laughed and, snuggling up to her lover, said, "Well, why sons? Maybe daughters or maybe both." The parents, hearing something going on behind them, looked at them. Alex asked, "What's up there? Is everything okay?" They drove home, happily discussing where and how they would do the nursery in the house, and what changes were still needed for the baby's arrival. These 2 couples seemed to be the happiest on the entire planet. Alice woke up slowly. What's going on? Her mind raced. There was something hard against her back, and panic immediately made her heart race. Maybe this is still a dream, Alice thought, trying to remember what had happened before she came to her senses. And the new girl seemed to have woken up. Came the gruff voice of a woman in the distance. "And you say dead? No. It's just a dream," Alice reassured herself. "Just a nightmare that's about to dissipate," but the smells, the sounds that entered her nostrils and ears, were too real for a nightmare. "And I wonder where she was brought to us from," came the voice again. Did a cutie like that manage to finish someone off? The voices were rough and unpleasant. Alice struggled to open her eyes and realized she was in a dingy cell. "Not at a resort," said a woman, sitting not far from Alice. Several gray-clad prisoners were sitting next to her, and the stare seemed no good. Alice felt fear engulf her entire being. She desperately didn't understand how she had ended up in this casemate. "What are you looking at?" one of the sitters threw angrily. Alice immediately jumped up, huddled in a corner, and tucked her legs under her. Her heart was racing, her eyes filled with terror. The people in the cell were clearly repeat offenders, with the marks of a hard life on their faces, and the fingers of their hands were littered with various tattoos. "Oh, she's going to faint from fear again," one of the sitters grinned. "I'm Barbara," muttered the recidivist sitting closest to Alice the Watcher. "What's your name?" Still dazed, Alice couldn't understand what was happening. Just yesterday, she had been in the arms of her husband Daniel on one of Sonny Beach's beaches. Memories came to her like a flashed frame from a movie. "Do you remember when we first met?" Daniel asked then, smiling. "Well, how could anyone forget that? You took me away from my own birthday party and drove me around town all night until it was time to meet the sunrise." Alice smiled. Their whole relationship had been just magical, unbelievable, like an adventure. But now the fairy tale had turned into a nightmare. Alice dreaded every minute spent in that gloomy cell. She was uncomfortable. She couldn't understand how she'd even ended up in this situation in the first place. "Did you swallow your tongue?" Barbara muttered angrily. The woman got up from her bunk, walked over to Alice, and leaned over her threateningly. "Talk about sewing someone up," Barbara hissed. "Maybe you're too cool to talk to us." "And my dear must have just forgotten her tongue on the outside," exclaimed the other. The unpleasant laughter and derogatory remarks of the cellmates made Alice feel even more afraid and helpless. She could feel the despair coursing through her soul. There were tears in her eyes, but she tried to hold them back, afraid to show her weakness. "So what did you get raked up for?" Barbara muttered. "Tell me before you're driven under the bunkhouse." "I'm sorry," Alice mumbled, then still tried to explain. "I don't understand." "Maybe you drank too much champagne at your fancy party," one of Barbara's companions hissed angrily. She stood up, picked up a mug from the table, and splashed Alice in the face with cold water. Alice shuddered, feeling the moisture spreading through her clothes. "For what? What have I done?" The desperation in her voice was growing with each passing second. Finally, Alice couldn't take it anymore and jumped up from her seat straight to the door. Beginning to pound on the steel-battered barrier, she screamed. "Somebody open up!" Alice pounded her fists on the cold surface. Suddenly, the small window in the center opened again, and the sleepy face of a guard appeared in the opening. "What do you want?" Scared, he asked gruffly. "Call the supervisor. I need to talk to him. There's some kind of mistake." "I'm not supposed to be here," Alice yelled. "Girl, you're in the wrong place to ask to see someone. Wait until morning. Maybe you'll get an explanation." Then the guard tossed indifferently. "Please, this is important. I need to get to the bottom of this situation. Call the supervisor. Please," Alice continued to plead with hope in her voice. The man only shook his head, maintaining a look of indifference on his face. No one's going to make a request in the middle of the night for someone like you, the policeman muttered. Frankly, if I were you, I wouldn't count on any response during the day either. Alice took a step back, clasping her hands to her chest. Feeling helpless inside, she was forced to accept the rejection. The metal flap slammed shut. The lock clinked. Sitting back in her seat, Alice felt the icy claws of fear clutching her heart. At no time in her life had she ever felt as insignificant as she did now. Alice tried to calm herself, but the fear and bewilderment would not leave her. She did not know how she had ended up in prison. Alice felt completely disconnected from reality. Barbara, who had taunted her earlier, came over and asked, "Are you really that stupid, or are you just pretending to be?" "No, I don't remember anything. I don't even know what date today is," Alice replied with despair in her voice. "July 18th, Barbara said with bewilderment. Alice felt a pang in her chest. It had been almost 2 days since she'd been in this nightmarish reality, and that knowledge only added to her sense of despair. "Who are you anyway?" Softening her voice, Barbara inquired. "It seems like just yesterday I married Daniel. We had a wedding on the beach. It was so beautiful, and today I wake up in this prison," Alice began to say. "Is that all you have to say?" Barbara raised an eyebrow skeptically. "My dad died recently, and he left me a pretty good inheritance. But that doesn't explain anything. I've been happy. We were doing well in my marriage to Daniel." Alice shook her head. Memories of her father made her soul feel sad. "I guess they said you killed someone," Barbara replied in a lowered voice. "What kind of nonsense is that?" "Who could I have killed?" Alice sighed sorrowfully. She felt an inner shock and panic. This realization terrified her, and she still couldn't believe the reality of what was happening. It didn't take long for morning to come. The scowling guard opened his window again, found Alice's gaze, and beckoned her over. "You're being summoned," he muttered when he saw the girl come to the door. "Warden?" Alice asked hopefully. She interjected. Face the wall, the guard swung the door open, pushed her against the nearest wall, turned her around, and clasped her hands painfully. "Let go!" Alice exclaimed with desperation in her voice. She felt the cold bracelets click on her wrist. The guard roughly took her under the elbow and pushed her out into the hallway. "Good morning, sweetheart." A man in an investigator's uniform smiled unpleasantly. "My name's John, the first investigating your case, but I wouldn't say I'm glad to meet you," Alice snorted. Her handcuffs were never removed, and Alice was forced to sit on the very edge of the uncomfortable chair. "Well, I'm sure you'll get used to our conditions," John smiled unpleasantly again. "Although perhaps you're ready to confess to your stepfather's death now. After all, you were the one who killed him. What stepfather? My father died recently." "Who do you think I am?" Alice exclaimed in bewilderment. "Well, honey, you don't have to pretend like you don't know. Your fingerprints are at the crime scene, and your DNA evidence confirms your involvement." John tossed some opinion sheets onto the table, pointing to them with his hand in an inviting gesture. Alice rounded her eyes in horror. Her heart was ready to jump out of her chest. "What fingerprints? What does DNA have to do with it?" A panicked thought battered at the back of her mind. "That's impossible. I didn't kill anyone." "I don't even know what crime we're talking about," Alice whispered. "Of course you do, of course you do. We've got a whole lot of innocent people here," John nodded. "What's this then?" The investigator dug through the folder again, then showed Alice the crime scene photos. Some man was lying face down, with blood all around him and shrapnel lying on the floor near his body. "What does this man have to do with this?" Alice asked in a trembling voice. She could feel the ground slipping from under her feet, and the worry was weighing so heavily on her soul that it was about to tear her apart. "That's your business," John marveled. "I might as well be." But here the neighbors have absolutely pinpointed the culprit, and even made a sketch. The investigator pointed with his hand to a booth hanging to Alice's right. She turned and stared at her own image. The girl in the sketch looked exactly like her, except the first and last name were different. This is some kind of forgery. It can't be me. Alice felt everything inside her turn over with horror. This sketch was proof that she had something to do with the mysterious crime. "Sweetheart, we found you on the seashore. You were lying there unconscious and had no identification on you. Your sketch matched the description given by the witnesses. Therefore, you are now a murder suspect," John said, savoring every word. "So that's not my last name. I'm a completely different person. Go to my husband. He will tell you," Alice cried out in despair. "We haven't seen any husband yet," he muttered doubtfully. "We have, however, discovered a man's belongings on the shore. I suppose your spouse, if there was one, is in distress, either drowned himself or another victim of your criminal tendencies." Alice felt her whole body go numb. She couldn't believe Daniel could have gotten into danger. "Ask someone else. My co-workers at work, relatives. But someone has to tell you what my real name is, and you'll even give those people's contacts yourself, she said. John raised an eyebrow skeptically. Yes, now. Alice, finding herself in a serious situation, began to frantically search her memory, trying to recall anyone who could confirm her identity and dispel any doubts that she was innocent. John watched her the whole time, enjoying the desperation of the suspect, but after a couple minutes he was clearly bored with the spectacle. Remember? The investigator inquired in a jumped-up tone. Just a minute. You don't have a minute, John bellowed. He leaned across the table, grabbed Alice by the hair and yanked hard, making her head whip from side to side. Quickly sign the confession. Get to the bunkhouse. I'm not going to be dealing with crap all day. Tears spurted from Alice's eyes. She cried out painfully, feeling the pain pierce her head and travel down her spine. The investigator continued to yell something and threaten, but now his voice sounded as if from far away. Helen, my subordinate at my father's firm, Alice said through sobs. What? John interjected angrily. Helen savage. She'll confirm that she knows me. The phone or something, not understanding, John interjected. Phone dictate. Stupid, the investigator let go of his hair. Alice sobbed a couple more times, then began confusedly dictating the right numbers. I'll call her. But if this is some kind of joke, you're going to be very sorry, John muttered angrily. Alice stared at the floor in pain and fear. The mind abstracted, preferring to ignore reality. Her gaze froze. After all, she wasn't capable of experiencing so much stress in such a short time, was she? Understand? No, John bellowed, giving Alice a whipping slap. Got it, Alice barely audibly whispered, feeling the blood begin to ooze from her busted lip. Several hours passed, which she spent like this in the investigator's office. Excuse me, Mr. Investigator. There's someone here to see you, came the voice of a guard from behind the door. What's going on here? The blonde shouted indignantly, throwing a lightning-fast glare in the investigator's direction as she barely crossed the threshold of his office. Ah, a friend of the suspect. I guess John shook his head indifferently. Yes, I've known Alice for a long time, and I have every confidence in her innocence. She is the daughter of my boss. And at the time this crime is alleged to have been committed, she was in a completely different location. We have witnesses, documents to prove her alibi, Helen spoke coldly. And we have proof, John parried stiffly. This is some kind of setup. Alice is innocent of anything, and no amount of fingerprints will help you wrangle 50 people who saw her in person at the negotiations on the day of the alleged murder. Alice listened to Helen and John's conversation with mixed feelings of anxiety and hope. At first, she had felt horror and anxiety as she listened to the investigator insist on her guilt and present the evidence. But with Helen's arrival and her confident words of innocence, hope rang within. I'm asking you to leave Alice alone, Helen said peremptorily. Otherwise, we'll have to get the press involved. No press, John retorted sourly. It seemed he had to admit that they simply didn't have enough grounds to accuse Alice. I'm sorry, I think there's been a mix-up, John said reluctantly. Turning to Alice, you may not be the only child in your family. There is a possibility that you had a twin sister. What twins? Alice interjected bitterly. But if you have any other ways to explain the devilishness going on in this case, I'm listening, the man muttered unhappily. A storm of feelings erupted inside Alice. She couldn't understand what this was about or why there was suddenly information about twins. She felt her life falling apart and the footing going out from under her feet. Mixed feelings, confusion, bewilderment, fear overwhelmed her. She realized that she needed to solve this puzzle to understand what was even going on in her life. Helen insisted that Alice be released immediately. Helen, do you know what happened to Daniel? Alice asked first thing. No one has seen him for the last few days, the assistant shrugged. Everyone thought you were on vacation after the wedding. The car began to pull away from the gloomy building, and anxiety grew more and more pronounced in Alice's heart. Are you sure you can manage? Helen asked doubtfully, looking at her superior. Yes, don't worry, Alice dismissed absent-mindedly. All her thoughts were now focused on the search. She ran into the house, literally flew up the second floor to her in her husband's bedroom, and embraced the sight. But there was only emptiness. Where could you have disappeared to? Alice muttered fearfully, looking through Daniel's things. Dialing a familiar number with trembling fingers, she put the phone to her ear, listening to the dial tone with bated breath. Come on, she whispered. It was all to no avail. The phone was silent, as was the empty bedroom, which was unable to clear up the monstrous situation one bit. Alice remembered again how they had planned to spend a romantic vacation on the beach. Trust me, it's going to be awesome, Daniel said with a smile, showing her pictures of golden sand and azure sea. We'll be all alone there, Alice said hesitantly, as if sensing trouble. Well, that's just the opposite of great. Just imagine you, me, the sea, and no one else around. Isn't it a fairy tale? A fairy tale. And if Alice had known how this ill-fated trip would turn out, she would never have agreed to this godforsaken place. Hello, Bill, this is Daniel's wife. Hi, do you have any idea where Daniel might be right now? She said, dialing the number of a fellow spouse they had met at the wedding. Hi, I thought he was on a wedding trip with you, Bill replied doubtfully. And we just missed each other. Sorry to bother you, Alice said. Is something wrong? Do you need help? Bill muttered worriedly. No, sorry, bye. Alice hung up the phone. Her inner feelings were at breaking point. Just out of desperation, Alice opened the message list on her phone, her eyes stumbling upon a text message from the DHS informing her that a major storm was coming. A chilling realization ran through her body. The words that had come almost a week ago never left her. A violent storm. The danger the meteorologists had warned of. Right, how could I have forgotten about the storm? They'd had to postpone the trip. But Daniel had insisted that no forecast of bad weather could interfere with their love. Okay, I hope you're right, Alice said. Romance and carelessness mixed with champagne that day, and she did nothing to stop her husband. How could I forget that the meteorologists were predicting a major storm that day? We couldn't only give warning. It was our mistake, but reflection and self-deprecation brought no comfort. It was my fault. I should have convinced Daniel not to go ashore, and I remained silent. And now he's probably drowned because of me. Alice's voice trembled with guilt and hopelessness. She tried to hold back the tears, but still they rolled down her cheeks, leaving hot paths behind them. Her breath caught at the thought that she would never see Daniel again, that he might have died because of her own carelessness. Daniel. I'm sorry. Alice closed her eyes, trying to dull the pain, but she could feel the guilt pressing on her shoulders like a heavy weight that she must now carry alone. Alice grieved for a few days, but then determination and the desire to find out the truth took over. I can't sit here in despair any longer, Alice exclaimed, feeling the walls of the empty bedroom literally suffocating her. Daniel deserves for the truth to come out. I have to find out what happened that day. That being said, it was done. She began contacting people who could help her in this endeavor. One of them was Victor Palick, her late father's former partner. Alice, I understand you. Losing loved ones is very painful, he said with compassion. I've known you since you were in diapers, and I'm always ready to help. I have an acquaintance named Andrew. I think he can help with this case. He'd want to work for me, Alice said doubtfully. You see, he's got an expensive operation coming up that he doesn't have enough money for. If you're willing to pay well, the guy will get you the very devil out of the ground. Trust me, he's the best detective I know. Yeah, I'm willing. It's a small price to pay for the truth. Alice shook her head. That's good. She clasped her hands to her chest. Feeling mixed emotions inside, Alice was willing to go to any lengths to find answers, even if it did require her to spend an unexpected amount of money. She met Andrew at a small cafe in the center of town. Alice gave him all the information she had on Daniel, directing him to search for him. But she decided to start on the other side, to find traces of her doppelganger. It remained to discuss a plan of action, which they did at a neat coffee shop table. I understand the mission. We'll try to find Daniel, or at least find out what happened to him. But what do you need this doppelganger for? Andrew asked, perplexed. The investigator just decided to write off an unsolved case on you, so he made up a fairy tale. Is it worth your time? I think if I find it might shed some light on the whole story. Maybe she knows something or has something to do with what happened. We need to find out why I was mistaken for her, and how it's simultaneously connected to Daniel's disappearance, Alice reasoned. Yeah, maybe there's no doppelganger at all. What makes you think that's true? Andrew said. It's just, it's like a gut feeling that there's a string to pull, and it all happened in the same period of time. Alice's eyes read determination to find out everything, and either find Daniel or mourn his ashes. Andrew nodded, realizing that was the logical course of action. Okay, let's start by looking for traces of your doppelganger. Perhaps her friends, co-workers, or even family can help. I'll work on that for now, while you continue your own search. And if you find anything, let me know. I think we can solve this mystery together. There's no need to despair before the time. Thank you, Alice whispered softly. Andrew's reassurance gave her strength, helped her shake off her troubles. Alice arrived in the quiet suburban neighborhood where her copy was said to be living with her stepfather. What a shithole, Alice muttered, deciding not to waste any time. She headed straight for the house, feeling a mixed sense of anxiety and determination. Finally, gone somewhere, the wretch left me and the kids and went away. And you didn't even tell us when you'd be back, the burly aunt blurted out as she stepped out into the stairwell. I'm sorry, you have me confused. I'm not who you thought I was, Alice said doubtfully. Shameless. Forgetting about your brood and driving off somewhere. So irresponsible, echoed the gaunt man. Alice tried to explain to them that they were wrong. It seemed the neighbors had mistaken her for a double. Wait a minute, I'm not Anna. You've got me confused. What are you talking about? Wailed the little man. Wait, yanked him back doubtfully by his aunt. There's something wrong. She's kind of frumpy, not at all like our catty. Exactly. And her features are softer and her eyes look different, the man muttered, immediately replacing anger with curiosity. My name is Greg, and this is my wife Irene, excuse me, but who is Katie and where is she now? Alice interjected. And she went away a long time ago. Left us with the kids. Didn't say when she'd be back. And didn't tell me anything at all, Greg grumbled resentfully. Yeah, you two seem to be a lot alike, like sisters. Katie lived here with her mom until she died. Her stepfather drank and abused her from childhood, Irene said in a lowered voice. And then he was found dead with a knife in his back. They suspect Katie killed him and ran away. I warned him not to torture a girl so much. Alice listened to the neighbors, feeling mixed emotions. She realized that she had a very mysterious story to tell, and she wanted to know more. The tale shocked her. It's unbelievable. I couldn't even imagine that I could have a sister. So where is she now? In a trembling voice, Alice asked again. Oh, we don't know, Irene shrugged. She was missing when the incident happened. The kids, 3 of them you can imagine, were put in an orphanage. Looking at her neighbor, Alice felt the bitter pain and simultaneous joy of knowing she might have a family, new relatives. Wow, Alice thought to herself. She sat in the car, staring at the orphanage where she was headed to see her nephews. The phone rang and she saw that it was Andrew, detective, who was helping her with the investigation. Hey, what's up? She said tiredly. I found some interesting information. It turns out that shortly before he was lost at sea, Daniel took out life insurance on his life for a substantial sum. The beneficiary of the insurance is listed as an unknown girl. Alice shuddered and pressed the phone harder against her ear. Her heart began to beat faster. How's that? Tell me more about it. I'm going to check for additional details, but it seems Daniel was able to insure his life for some ulterior purpose. It's kind of weird. I think we should find out who the girl is and why Daniel left her, the insurance, Andrew said. Shock rippled through Alice's body. She was slowly realizing that her husband, her beloved and closest person, might have married her for some obscure purpose, only to die afterwards and leave the money to some unknown person. The thought seemed both absurd and eerie at the same time. I can't believe it. It's horrible. What kind of person would do such a thing? And who is she, this girl? We must certainly find out. Of course, I won't give up the search. Let's see this investigation through to the end. Andrew's voice began to get lost in the storm of emotions that such strange news left behind. Okay, sorry, I've got a case. I need to finish it. Need any help? I'm out of town. I think I can handle it. I'll be in touch if you need anything, Alice said. Andrew dropped the call. There was a short beep on the speaker. Alice entered the orphanage. 3 little kids of about 5 years old, playing in the hallway and unaware that their Aunt Alice had come to meet them, caught her eye. My heart sank. There was too much character in their faces, and they were similar to each other, giving away their origins. Hello, who are you here to see? The woman asked, smiling at Alice. You know, I have a strange request, Alice mumbled. At that moment, her heart beat harder. Alice wanted to make sure that she was really related to these children. Could you give me samples for DNA testing on these kids over here, Alice said, pointing to her nephews. I don't know what you mean, the woman frowned. I recently found out that I might be related to them, and I'd like to run a test. If it turns out to be correct, I can take the children, can't I? Alice could feel the excitement twisting everything inside. When she had come to the clinic to have the DNA test done to confirm her parentage, the doctor had immediately warned her that she would have to wait. And how could it even come to this? Alice muttered, rubbing her palms together nervously. She waited for the results of the tests with hope and fear, which was already habitually present in her life, only changing its appearance from time to time. Finally, the result was ready. Well, here are your tests, the lab technician said, holding out an envelope. The result is positive. Congratulations, or is it sympathy? I don't know what your reason for doing this test was. Listening to his words, Alice shook with excitement. She slowly opened the form and carefully read the small lines. Soon she was back in the orphanage director's office, holding the papers with the results. Her heart was beating harder than ever. Hello, Alice Wright. What a familiar face you have. What can I do for you? The principal asked. Yes, that's right. I came back with the results of the DNA test. The children that were given to you a while ago are my nephews. The test confirmed the parentage, replied Alice. The principal was stunned by the news, but then his face suddenly lit up with memories, as if he finally realized why she seemed familiar. You know, I have a great memory for alumni, the principal said cryptically, but age, I repent. It's only just now dawned on me. Why? It seems as if I've seen you before, Alice marveled. Really, yes, I remember that girl and their mother, and you when you were barely older than your nephews. You were sisters, and then you were separated as infants. But not me. I was working as a caretaker at the time, and had no influence on anything. Once again, Alice felt her heart clench at the truth that had been revealed. Just like that, a phrase dropped so easily it completely shattered the life she was used to. Yeah, it's weird. I was sure that I was my parents' own daughter, and now I realized that I always felt something was wrong. Tears came to her eyes. Trying to save face, Alice furtively wiped them from the corners of her eyes, but the gesture didn't escape the principal's notice. This is a difficult moment, but it's also a chance to be reunited with your family. I hope you can help them once things are settled, he said. Alice felt joy, but also fear and uncertainty about the future. But she knew she now had a purpose to be who she really was and to take care of her real family. After a very long time, Alice returned to the principal's office once again. His name was Christopher Valentine, and this time they had time to get to know each other properly. It wasn't easy. I spent a week trying to get all the right papers together, going through a lot of restrictions and red tape. But when I saw their smiles, when they saw me for the first time, all the difficulties turned out to be for naught, Alice said softly. Christopher Valentine looked at the newfound guardian of 3 little ones with a smile and nodded at her. You know, no hardship can compare to the joy you have brought to these children and their smiles, a reward for your selfless care. Alice smiled and sighed. Thank you, Christopher Valentine. I must do everything in my power to provide them with a better future. The joy of motherhood, unavailable to Alice before, colored her life with pleasant colors. However, the shadow of the unknown still lay over the story of Daniel and missing Katie. Alice met Andrew at the cafe to discuss the results of his investigations. Well, did you find anything new? Alice asked. Barely had he crossed the threshold of the coffee shop. Yes. Alice, I found the name of the girl who was supposed to be paid the insurance money on Daniel's policy. Her name is Lucy Crawford, Andrew replied. Alice paled slightly when she heard the name. She had heard it before, hadn't she? Lucy Crawford. Turns out Lucy worked as a secretary in the department of your company that Daniel headed. It turns out my little investigation uncovered a little more curious details. What curious details? Alice asked. Andrew's words left Alice perplexed and alarmed. Why would the secretary receive an insurance payout after his death? Why not me or his relatives, she thought. I think a little. Alice, you're not a stupid woman. Andrew shook his head. Of course, we don't know all the details, but from all appearances, there was an affair between her and Daniel. That relationship could have gone very far and apparently led to something bad. Alice froze, trying not to breathe. It seemed that one careless movement and she would crumble. The secretary's affair with her husband, the insurance policy, all pointed to the fact that she might have been involved in his death. Maybe she's the killer? Alice's mind flashed. She leaned back in her chair. A heavy feeling of disappointment and loss came over her. Alice picked up her briefcase, looked up, and headed in the direction of human resources. She hoped to find out how to contact Lucy Crawford so she could locate her and get to the bottom of this situation. Hello, I'm looking for information on an employee of Lucy's. I need to get in touch with her, Alice said. When the human resources manager came out to her, she looked at Alice with surprise and then smiled. Lucy Crawford. You mean the former employee? I mean, she quit just a day ago, decided to move to another company. He didn't even do her 2 weeks. I don't know who her patron is, the manager replied. Alice was shocked. Why did she quit? Where does she work now? That's the thing. Moved to our competitors after leaving her application just a day ago. Said they offered her more favorable terms, but it's strange that she left so suddenly. Alice realized that her target had slipped away at the last moment. She needed to find Lucy and find out the truth, but that was proving more difficult than she had expected. Andrew didn't call until a few days later, when Alice was finally desperate to find anything. Alice, I've managed to track Lucy down, and I have good news, Andrew announced from the doorstep. Months of investigation and constant communication had melted the ice between them. Now they were a little closer than just colleagues. Andrew even caught himself thinking that Alice sympathized with him as a woman, but he wasn't in a hurry to give in to his feelings. What is it? Tell me already, Alice said impatiently. It turns out that Daniel is alive. Andrew immediately stunned her, and he was closer than you think. Not far away at all, in a cabin in the woods, almost near the edge of your town. Alice felt a whole wave of feelings. When Andrew had informed her that Daniel was hiding near their house, at first it had been surprise how was that even possible, then relief at the thought that her husband was still alive. However, That was quickly replaced by other dark emotions. I didn't want to bother you right away. That's why I called the police to begin with, Andrew continued cautiously. What, they detained him? Why did you decide that without me? I just did my job, Andrew shrugged. I didn't piss you off for helping me find the truth, not to put my husband behind bars. That's what interrogations are for, among other things, to find the truth. I'm sorry, Alice, but Daniel confessed to everything. Andrew shook his head regretfully, to everything he said. Told me that his intentions were unfair to you. He knew the code to your safe and was going to rob the house, just waiting for the right time. Ah, I can't believe it. He was willing to do that in his own house. As Alice realized the news about Daniel, her soul filled with a mixture of grief, disappointment, and a sense of betrayal that expressed itself in tears on her cheeks. Yes, that's exactly right. But thanks to the quick work of the police officers, we were able to thwart his plans. He repented and signed a clean confession. Andrew tried to support his friend. Yeah, it's hard to digest, Alice muttered, looking down at the floor. We've been through so much already. Now this. But I guess the important thing is that he's alive and will be punished for his actions. Yeah, it's not your fault he turned out to be a criminal. A fake death for insurance for a mistress. A robbery. He didn't deserve all that. But at least Daniel can't do any more harm. That must be hard. But you have to remember, you have those who are there to support you at any time. Thank you, Andrew. You've done so much, Alice whispered, shaking her head. Always happy to help. You're a strong woman, you're sure to get through this. Tears rolled down her cheeks, leaving salty trails. After Daniel's capture, the days stretched on. Andrew had offered to arrange a date with her ex-husband, but Alice had refused, not wanting to see the unhappy traitor. Now she wanted to concentrate on getting on with her life and regaining some semblance of footing. One day, Alice decided to call the office to see if everything was all right. Helen, as usual, answered her call in a businesslike manner, but the conversation suddenly descended into strange happenings. Alice, how are you? We've been worried about you, Helen said. Thank you. Yes, more or less, but we need to move on somehow. I understand we haven't worried you, but do you know about Lucy yet? What happened to her? Alice was wary. An ominous foreboding settled in her soul. Turns out she just betrayed Daniel, and it looks like she started gathering some dirt on her new bosses, Helen said. They fired her, set up an internal investigation, and then concluded that she was involved in insurance fraud. So Lucy ended up in jail too, just like your ex-spouse. It's kind of a nightmare. All the seemingly familiar people have turned out to be crooks. I feel like my life has changed irrevocably. Alice realized that she needed to move on despite all the obstacles, but she was too overwhelmed by everything that had happened. In a big cozy house surrounded by greenery and flowers, she took care of her family, setting up house for the children, building place and play and learn. These boys were like her own children to her now. She did her best to make their lives happy and carefree. The little ones, barely learning to talk, were full of energy and questions. Alice taught them by playing interesting educational games and helped them explore the world around them. In the evenings, they gathered together in the living room. Alice read stories before bedtime. After a while, Alice and Andrew stayed in a small room after the operation. There was silence, and both realized that they now had a chance to talk alone. Thank you, Alice, for finding the strength to talk me into this examination. I didn't think I'd ever walk normally. You're a brave man, Andrew said. You've overcome so much in life. I was sure you could do it, Alice replied. But I have to say, I couldn't have done it without your support. You've always been there for me. And I'm very grateful for that, Andrew smiled softly. Friends are supposed to help each other through the hardest moments, Alice smiled back timidly. I want you to know how grateful I am to you. I mean, you literally changed my life, Andrew said. And you changed mine too, Alice replied. Their eyes met, and in that moment, words became superfluous. Smiles of happiness and gratitude played on their faces. They knew they now had their whole lives to share together. The hospital room was filled with soft light streaming in through the half-closed curtains. Andrew lay on the bunk while Alice sat next to him, holding his hand in hers. It was at that moment that they realized something had changed between them. Alice, I feel like I've gotten to know you better than I ever have. You're so caring, so kind, Andrew said. It's been mutual. You were the only one who stayed by my side when things were hard for me, Alice replied. Their hands began to squeeze each other tighter. Andrew, the moment our eyes meet, I realize that I feel something more than friendship for you. I like you, Alice whispered, desperately embarrassed. Her heart pounded in her chest, making her whole body tremble with excitement and fear. She had decided to take this step, no matter what, because she wanted to be honest with herself and with the man she could love. Me too, Alice, I can't imagine my life without you. You fill my heart with warmth and happiness, Andrew replied. They drew closer to each other and their lips joined in a tender kiss that was full of feeling and promise. Their love, which had arisen at the most inopportune moment, turned out to be real and strong, ready to cope with any difficulty. Katie's babies had long since grown accustomed to Alice's home and were an endless source of joy and laughter for their new caring mom. She hired a nanny for them, who took care of the children in her absence. But as it happens, even the most caring nanny didn't always have time for everything, especially considering the 3 active toddlers. Recently, the children started talking about something strange. They claimed to have seen their mom when no one was home. This woman was sad, but always read them stories, talked and comforted them. They said that Katie would come to them in their room. That sounds kind of weird. I think you should seek medical help, consult some doctor, although it could just be a childish fantasy. But yes, Andrew, you're right. We can't let this go unchecked. These are my children, and I don't want them to be threatened by anything, Alice said. At first, she thought it was just a fantasy, but as time went on, she began to notice strange things. Food was disappearing from the refrigerator. Things were moving around, and she felt like someone was watching her. This caused her anxiety and even some fear. Andrew moved into Alice's house, and together they decided to start solving the mysterious incidents that were happening to the children. They set up cameras in the house, hoping to record anything that might explain the children's strange stories. Andrew went on duty. He stayed up nights studying the camera footage and waiting for any unusual events to occur, but the long nights passed without any sign of any obvious manifestations of mysticism. He began to think more and more often that the children were badly mistaken, and perhaps this was just a figment of their imagination. A few days later, when everyone had decided that the children had simply made up the story and the night watch had been lifted, the little ones again said that Mommy was coming. This conversation caused Alice and Andrew to turn on the video cameras again, and their attention was drawn to the screen. Do you see this? She comes at night to see the kids. It's really catty, my sister Alice exhaled excitedly. I wonder what made her come back after all these months. I don't know, maybe she sensed the boys were in danger, or maybe she needs to pass something on. Let's find a way to contact her. Figure it out. But she comes on her own. Just waiting for another visit is enough, Andrew shrugged. Yeah, we can't miss the chance to find out the truth. Why she's back and where she's been disappearing to in the first place, Alice agreed. And then one night they finally had their luck. Katie sneaked back into the house, thinking everyone was asleep. But Andrew and Alice were ready, meeting her right in the hallway. Katie, hello there. We need some answers. Why are you coming back like a thief now? Alice asked. Yeah, I come to see them, to be closer to them. But I didn't hurt anyone, replied the guest fearfully. We've seen the camera footage, and we know you come when everyone is already asleep. Why all the secrecy? Andrew frowned. Please understand me. I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want to be around the kids, replied Katie. Then why did you disappear? We all thought you were in trouble or dead. What happened? Alice asked, softening her voice a little. A man owed a lot of money, began Katie explaining. And when he realized he didn't have it, he decided to bail me out, said he didn't need me anymore. But I guess they weren't happy with that exchange, Andrew said. No, Katie shook her head sadly. They killed him, and then they came after me as a witness. A confused but determined Alice walked over to her sister, who was shuffling nervously from foot to foot at the door. Katie, I'm sorry you've been through all this. We can help you, but you need to cooperate with us. Turn yourself in to the police. Running away is not the answer. Let's talk about how we can do this so you can be exonerated. You don't understand. I didn't kill my stepfather. It was his drinking buddies. They were behind the horror, Katie said with tears in her eyes. I believe you. We'll get a good lawyer. Yes, Katie, I know a good one. He's a real professional. He'll work on your case and prove that you're innocent. All we need is your consent to find out, Andrew said confidently. Do you think it'll work? Katie asked hopefully. Absolutely, Alice nodded. We won't leave you in the lurch. We're family. Katie, still covered in tears, hesitated at first, but then she took a deep breath and nodded firmly. I don't want to run and hide anymore, she said. The police and Andrew breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that they were on the right track. Alice put her arms around her sister and stroked her back, comforting her. It's the right thing to do. Katie will be by your side every step of the way. While Katie provided information to the lawyer, Andrew, like a true detective, continued his investigation. He checked all available evidence, conducted interviews, and soon conclusive evidence was found that Katie was innocent. Alice and Andrew supported her. They came to see her when she was in custody, discussed plans with her lawyer, and were always there to support her morally. Every look, every gesture said that they believed in her innocence, and finally the big day arrived. In court, all the evidence prepared by Andrew was presented, and after much debate, the court announced the verdict. Katie, you are acquitted. Your innocence has been recognized by the court. You are hereby acquitted of all charges. Alice, Andrew, and Katie hugged each other joyfully. Tears of happiness came from all three of them, and it united them even more. Sitting in her cozy home, Alice decided to share some important news with her lover. Her heart was full of joy. She believed that Andrew would share her happiness, although she was a little apprehensive. Andrew, I'm pregnant, Alice breathed out and stood waiting. Alice, I love you very much, Andrew replied. They embraced, knowing that their future would be filled with joy and happiness. I'm sorry to interrupt, Barbara suddenly interrupted their unity. Yes, is something wrong? Alice and Andrew were immediately alarmed. No, I mean with the children. Barbara lowered her gaze. What is it? Andrew intervened. Alice, I'm sorry for reacting so emotionally. When I saw that mark on Katie's arm, it just shocked me. What's wrong? Why are you so worried? I saw the birthmark today. And it's exactly like the one on my daughter that I gave birth to many years ago. Are you sure? Andrew questioned warily, shifting his gaze from his nanny to his lover. Yes, that's for sure. I gave birth to 2 twin girls many years ago. I've long despaired of meeting them, but now with this mole, I have my eye on Alice. Alice felt her heart begin to beat more frequently. The conversation was too exciting not to affect her, but Alice was hardly prepared for the turmoil Valentina wanted to unleash on her. Sobbing but looking at the young people, she decided to share what had long weighed on her soul. Bitter memories came to the surface, and she began to tell her story. A long time ago, when you, Katie, were just born, my husband met me at the maternity hospital, Nanny said bitterly. He was so happy, so joyful, so full of hope, but everything changed very quickly. It was like he turned out to be someone I didn't know. When he found out you were born, he started celebrating with his friends. One day, another, and then he just went on a bender, and suddenly our whole life was nothing but fear and violence. Alice listened with a shudder, realizing that this horror story was actually a chronicle of her real family. It was frightening to even imagine how much her mother had to endure. It was as if the weight of having children had changed him. He became more dangerous and tougher. He drank, beat me, disappeared nights unknown, where Valentina continued in a trembling voice. One day, in one of the worst moments, I grabbed a knife. It was all over. I don't remember how it happened, but I did it. I ended up being arrested and sent to jail. You went through such horrors, and it's all because of us, Alice whispered sadly. No, it had nothing to do with the girls. Valentina tried to calm herself. I lost my freedom, and you ended up in the little house, and then in the orphanage. All these years I searched for you, but the traces were lost. You ended up in a rich family, and Katie stayed poor. So I'm the bad mother, since I couldn't keep you from all those horrors. Alice hugged Valentina, trying to comfort her mother, who had experienced so much suffering and loss. I can't imagine how much suffering you've been through. But we're together now. It's all in the past, thank you. Alice, I hope nothing can ever keep us apart again. I'm sorry. I overheard you, came Katie's voice suddenly. She had been standing in the doorway all this time, leaning her shoulder against the jamb. Well, come to us quickly, then exclaimed Alice. The women gathered in the parlor to talk about what had happened. It was necessary to reveal the cards to the end, so that no more secrets should poison the life of their family. Katie looked very depressed, but was finally ready to tell her story too. I met my baby's father back in high school. We were classmates and started dating after graduation when he left for the army. I waited for him to come back. He came back. We got married. He became a trucker, and one day there was a terrible accident. He was gone. Katie, I can't even imagine what you've been through, Alice said bitterly. Yes, after he died, I lost the meaning of life, thought it was better to die. But my children, my little ones, they saved me from that terrible mistake. I realized that they were the only thing I had left in this world, and I did everything I could to protect them and give them a good future. Yes, you are very strong, but now we can take care of our loved ones together. Since fate has brought us together, I'm sure, Alice said, we'll be together and we'll be fine. Yes, Katie, we'll support you. You're not alone anymore. You have both your sister and your mom, and we'll do anything to help each other. Barbara hugged her daughter gently. Many tears were shed that day, but in the end, the family came together, and a future filled with hope and love awaited them. Laurel looked out the window where the other children were playing and envied them. Hide and seek, Cossack bandits, soccer, and dozens of other fun activities were all near and far at the same time. She never got to meet anyone in the yard, but that wasn't the only thing stopping her. She just doesn't have time to play or even get to know anyone. The family could not do without her. First, my mom was in an accident, was in the hospital for a long time, with difficulty moved to the amphibian day stroller. And almost immediately, unable to bear the grief, Grandma Vivian fell ill. She, of course, moved around, but no farther than the apartment. And so, at the age of 11, Laurel became the legs and arms of the family. The girl hoped things would change soon. Daddy called her and promised he would come back and help her. Even if he took over some of Laurel's household chores, she would be able to go outside not only to school, the store, the post office. If only he would fulfill his promise. Laurel sighed and began to prepare the vegetables for the borscht, peeled potatoes, grate beets and carrots. Fry everything in a pan with tomatoes and onions. Then boil broth, but be sure to pour out the first broth. Carefully put the fried vegetables in the pot so that without splashing, otherwise the kitchen will have to clean. And then she added an author's touch to her grandmother's recipe. When the borscht was almost ready, she added mushrooms and sausages. and cover it with a lid to let it stand. Grandma Vivian told her. You sprinkle vinegar on it. With borscht like this, any guy will marry you. You cook it today, and I'll show you how to make it tomorrow. I'll have a little rest, though. Tomorrow never came. Grandma had many recipes, but now they could only afford the most inexpensive products. Pasta, rice and beans, buckwheat with minced meat or hot sandwiches. And after all, both grandmother and mother need to eat well so as not to get sick. Laurel sighed again. She wanted a piece of real sausage or salted trout. A month ago, when the school had a party and the benefactors from the administration came, she couldn't keep her eyes off the tray of snacks. Some big guy in a jacket even reprimanded her. Don't eat too many sandwiches, he said. You'll get a tummy ache. Silly uncle. How can food give you a tummy ache? It's more likely that she'll get cramps from hunger again. From the big stage, the school children were told how much they care about orphans, homelessness, and other problems of people, and then gave her a ball and a stick. Laurel would gladly replace the equipment with a couple of bags of potatoes, rice, and buckwheat. Food supplies were running low. Lunch is ready, said the girl cheerfully. There was a lot of meat left on the chicken bones, which the saleswoman proudly called a soup set. Laurel carefully cut it off to divide it equally. Mom could make it to the kitchen, though it cost her quite a bit of effort. Grandma, on the other hand, would have to be fed in the bedroom. She only got out of bed to get to the toilet or bathroom. Oh, Laurel, Mom sighed, sitting in her wheelchair. You should go outside, take a walk. I can't, the girl answered. I have to wash the floor, do the laundry, and now the dishes. To feed Grandma. Laurel never showed her mother that it was hard for her. The girl felt guilt early on. She was the reason her mom was in a wheelchair. If she had not distracted her that day, true, her mother convinced her otherwise, but still. Now Laurel tried to somehow make up for her guilt, and to do this it was necessary to become everything for her mother and grandmother. Cooking, cleaning, going to the store. How hard could it be? For sour cream should go, said Mom. We're out of sour cream. Good, sighed Laurel. I'll just feed my grandmother. Do you have any money left? Mom asked. My allowance isn't due until tomorrow. Maybe I have some change. There was only one store left in their part of town, and they didn't want to go there. The girls still remembered how they used to live close to the center of the metropolis. In such a place, where on a tiny piece of land try to settle as many people as possible. They lived on the 25th floor, and it wasn't at the top. Laurel had been used to heights since childhood and had never imagined going down to the ground, but she had to. A long time ago, when nothing foreboded trouble, Laurel admired the views of the city from the window, and now they lived on the first. So there was at least a slim chance that her mother could go outside. In theory, it was easy. The first floor is optimal for a wheelchair user. It would seem, open the door, carefully lower the wheels, and enjoy the open space. What spoiled the picture was the staircase between the entrance and the landing. Only 7 steps, Laurel sometimes climbed them in a single leap. But for Mom, it was a real Everest. The administration promised to solve the issue, to put a ramp or an elevator, someday. And then, where to go? In the center near the house, there was a subway and stores. But here, in the suburbs, even the curbs aren't low everywhere. A couple of times a month, they did walk if someone helped. It's hard for Mom to move the wheels herself, but that wasn't all Laurel cared about. Looking at her mom, she realized that she was giving up. It was getting harder and harder for her to move forward, harder to heal and smile. She was getting desperate, which meant the headmaster's warnings might well become real. Grandma, are you going to eat? The girl asked. Feeding Grandma Vivian is a whole ritual. First you have to help her sit down, then you have to move the table to the bed. To listen from Baba Vivian, a whole treatise of words of advice, compliments, and stories from life. Then she would take a spoon or fork in her hand, peck at the dish her granddaughter had prepared, and plunge into reminiscence. Peggy, when are you going to get married? Grandma Vivian might ask in the middle of the meal. Laurel sighed. That her grandmother confused her with her mother was half the problem. Such questions were clearly connected to something more serious. Even with her childish mind, the girl realized that Vivian was going deeper and deeper into her own world. It was beginning to confuse not only people, but times as well. Her grandmother was pitiful. Laurel somehow could not remember her young. It felt like she had come into this world as an old woman. Grandma Viviane, is the borscht tasty? Asked the girl to change the subject. Yes, nodded the old woman. Only you forgot the potatoes. Hey, how? Laurel was surprised. There it is, floating. What kind of potatoes are potatoes? Grandma Vivian lamented. Then came a monologue about how in her youth she had worked on the collective farm and spent time in the fields. Laurel had heard this story 100 times too, and from time to time the narrative grew with new details. Over the years, the heroism of rural laborers increased, and the potatoes in her grandmother's stories became the size of watermelons. Laurel took the dishes from her grandmother, carried them to the kitchen, and began to pack for the store. Where is that package? It seems like it costs only a few rubles, but if you pay every time, over time 100 will accumulate. Run to the store already. I'll wash the dishes. Don't worry, Mom said, but the girl shook her head. Mom kept trying to do some housework, but Laurel knew that every movement brings her pain, especially in the stroller. After the move, there was no money left for special furniture. The regular kitchen set didn't fit Mom. If she could reach the sink, it was with great difficulty. May I save your strength, Mom? Laurel said. I'll wash the dishes and go to the store. The girl delayed the grocery shopping as long as she could, and it was not just a lack of money. On her grandmother's pension and her mother's allowance, they could survive. The money was distributed by Mom, first of all, for the most necessary things. At least they weren't in danger of starvation. It was the saleswoman who seemed to have taken up residence in the pavilion. Her razor-sharp words really hurt. We could have walked to the supermarket. But first of all, it's a half-hour's walk. Secondly, then I'd have to carry the heavy bags home. And thirdly, the prices are too high. They could afford a store with a sharp-tongued saleswoman, a supermarket. Do you want me to go to the store with you? Mom suggested it. She knew very well what was embarrassing her daughter. No, you what? You, replied the girl. What a wind, you'll get cold feet again. You just don't listen to her, said her mother. Take the groceries, give her the money, and that's it. Do you want me to file a complaint against her? There must be someone to take care of her. Mom, relax. It's okay. Laurel's cell phone screen lit up. She looked at it and hurried to turn it over. You didn't notice? Mom didn't seem to see anything suspicious in her sudden movement. That's good, otherwise she would be angry. The girl has her own secrets that she didn't want to tell her mom or grandmother about yet. Many years ago, talented managers derived a formula for success that allowed tiny stores to compete with huge supermarkets. To do this, there should have been no more than 2 people left there, and the working day to grow to obscene values. This, however, should not have any effect on the salaries of employees. Only the most desperate people could endure such conditions. One of them is firmly attached to the store with the poetic name Divney. Look who's here. Shouted the saleswoman. Our heroine, a Spartan girl. Well, do you want to choose the potatoes on offer? There was nothing marvelous in the store. Laurel thought they should put another sign on the front, mean. It was the sales girl who was constantly humiliating her. One day, the two of them came in here with her mom, and the wheelchair user's affliction became a source of inspiration for the mean woman. She didn't miss the slightest opportunity to say something mean. Thank God there was no one in the pavilion at that time. There was no escape from the sharp tongue of a woman of indeterminate age. She seemed to take pleasure in the fact that she could treat customers as she pleased. There was simply no second store in their neighborhood. A mystery. Laurel put sour cream, tasteless cookies, and bread in her basket. She thought, and added glazed cheese, the cheapest. Oh, what's the holiday? The saleswoman splashed her hands in a martial arts way. Birthday. Are you going to spread cheese on cookies? The girl was silent. Such jokes could still be tolerated, although she gave it with difficulty. But sometimes the saleswoman crossed the boundary of all decency and said really hurtful things, bringing Laurel to tears. Why she would do that is unclear. Couldn't Mom run away? The woman continued. Laurel's lack of response was getting on her nerves. The faker. I've seen her move her leg. She's playing the part for the benefit, isn't she? No. How much do I owe you? Laurel asked as she put her purchases on the counter. I won't tell you, the saleswoman replied. Not until you answer my questions. The door slammed and another customer entered the pavilion. And since he was unfamiliar to Easy, she preferred to keep silent. She practiced her barbs and witticisms only with regular customers. The newcomer seemed to have been here a couple of times, bought bread and cigarettes, but he didn't look familiar enough to be her victim. And he looked too serious for that. All right, said the saleswoman. 290 rubles, and no change. But in Lydina's purse there was nothing but change anyway, so she easily counted out the necessary amount. Quickly putting the purchases in a bag, the girl hurried out the door. Ugh, that was the last time. She would never come here again, and now home. After all, in addition to her chores, she still has homework to do, and school was not going well.
The store is just outside the house, just a 5-minute walk, just in time to call her daddy. He sent her a smiley face in Messenger. To prevent her mother from finding out about their communication, she signed it as her classmate, Nadia Ivanova, and in the correspondence, only funny pictures and funny videos. It's like two girls exchanging humor. The precaution was unnecessary because her mom didn't touch her smartphone anyway and didn't control her in any way.
No. Hi, Laurel said. How are you?
I'm fine, Dad replied. His voice was tired as always.
It's been a whole year since they started communicating. Now Dad is far away, somewhere in Africa, but he will surely come back. Laurel believed that for some reason. Every conversation ended with his promises that he was going to his homeland, but for some reason he never gave any exact dates. No, I have good news, the Dad said. I think 2 more weeks, and that's it. No, to us. URL asked hopefully. Dad didn't say anything. Then he told her about his work. He described with enthusiasm how many different buildings they were building in a foreign, distant land. He told her how interesting his work was and how strange the rules were in the African country. Battery sends money, but his mother refuses to receive it, and she wouldn't answer her phone. Laurel believed it. What else could she do? Don't tell your mom I called. Dad told her goodbye, or she'll get angry again. Okay, Laura answered. Oh, I'll come back, and then everything will be fine. I will. Just hang in there. No one knew they were calling each other. Her mother had strictly forbidden her to talk to her father at an early age. Laurel cried at first, but then she got used to it. Both her grandmother and mother said only bad things about him. Up to a time, the girl believed it all. But the situation changed after that very accident, when her blossoming and successful mom was in a wheelchair. Mom, I'm back, Laurel announced.
Good for you. Are you okay, or is something wrong?
Peggy always noticed her daughter's mood swings. Now she came in, not quite herself. She must have been listening to that sales girl again. Peggy wondered why a woman from a tiny store would talk to customers like that. But here, on the outskirts of the city, where they were forced to move from the center, their own rules make. Well, Mom, Laurel replied. All in all, it's fine. Let's talk about it, Peggy suggested. The hardest thing in the life of a disabled person is isolation. Not being able to go to work, not being able to pick out clothes at the store, not even being able to go to church. You can't mop the floor. You can't get something from the top shelf of the closet. You need a helper all the time. Your daughter, the youngest and only one, became your helper. And then Mom got sick, as if she didn't have enough to deal with. Peggy felt remorse all the time. She was ashamed of her own helplessness, of the pain that accompanied every movement. It had been 3 years since her accident, and there was little hope of recovery. Yes, Mom, Laurel said. There's something I wanted to talk to you about. I don't know how you'll feel about it. Suddenly, they heard some noise from Grandmother's room. Vivian watched television almost all day long, but now was the rare moment when the box was silent. That's why the rumble seemed especially loud. Laurel froze in a daze. Clinging to the wall, Peggy moved slowly toward her mother's room. She crossed the hallway and pushed open the door. Laurel. The woman shouted. Hurry up and get in here. Grandma's not well. Laurel, where's my phone? Only the most pleasant memories remained in it, especially school. Over time, the remarks, the antics of classmates fade. Inedible dishes in the school cafeteria. And any warm moments, any celebrations become brighter. Gabriella was firmly stuck in this school, which she headed for a good 2 decades. And she still didn't want to retire. Me. Hello. Once again, the principal was being nice. Come in, have a seat. We don't have time for that, replied the interlocutor gloomily. Strong coffee, but no sugar. The inspectors had been to her school countless times. Before Gabriella's eyes, approaches to education were changing, from the absolute freedom of the Naftis to the total control of the 20s. She saw the epidemic of piercings, survived the invasion of rappers in oversized pants, witnessed the birth and untimely death of Imoe, and only one thing remained constant: the constant complaints of the administration. Gabriella was nervous. There were too many issues with this Lida and her family. In her quiet school, where only children of ordinary parents attended, hardship was neither liked nor approved of. The administration had sent down the third letter demanding that they look into the situation and take action. Galena was hinted that her unwillingness to read between the lines could be regarded as incompetence. The child is in a dangerous situation, argued McCullough, a department head at the administration. We could lose the girl at any moment. Don't you agree with me? The principal's intransigence forced the official to come to her school in person. Gabriella wistfully recalled the 2 blissful years of the coronavirus pandemic. Remote work, off days but paid, masks for visitors, and most importantly, no inspections. Alas, the sweet time is over. And now, if an official suddenly wants to visit her, he may not even warn. I can't imagine how a teacher with such a solid experience and work experience doesn't see the problem. The official lamented. It is obvious that the girl needs our help.
We work with her every day, the principal assured him. Here, take a look. Inspections, testing, preventive talks. All according to the manual. More coffee.
This coffee only makes my heart ache, McCullough replied with an ostentatious sadness. Do it again, with a little more sugar. And let's not change the subject, please. Gabriella took a deep breath. She looked at the official and tried to calculate his age. He'd graduated from Teachers University at 22, not before. 3 years at least, he'd spent as a school teacher. Then he probably worked his way up to deputy. That's another 3 years. Then he spent a long time trying to get through the selection process for a higher position. Total, 33 years old, not younger. He's old enough to be her son, but he certainly looks older than his years. Your information is out of date, the official said. With all certainty, I declare that the grandmother is not able to look after the child. Why? The principal was surprised. Age is not a judgment, young man. What's that got to do with it? The official waved his hand resentfully. That's not the point. She went to the hospital yesterday, a fractured femoral neck. We have, the latest information. What a nightmare, Gabriella whispered. A fracture like that is every elderly person's worst dread. You see, McCullough nodded his head. We have to take immediate action. You can't just write it off as some mythical grandmother's care. As you can see, I'm well informed. Gabriella sighed again. She would have to call a council, invite both the girl and her mother. She was notoriously difficult to get around, to bring the issue for discussion, to hear opinions. For some reason, Galena did not want to make a mess of it. People live their lives. Why touch them? As if there were no other problem families on her plot. Well, one question, she said. Why do you care so much about this family? Is she special? 2 months in the end of the year. Before you know it. And you have not removed a single child in a dangerous situation from the family. B answered the official from the administration. A 0 bears 0 in the column. You short-sightedly fail to notice that it is the Petrovs who are fit to add a 1 to the report. Or how do we explain that gap at the end of the year?
Then we just don't have those kids, Gabriella replied calmly. Old neighborhood, not many families. We've never suffered from an overpopulation of dysfunctional ones.
I don't want to hear excuses, shouted the man. All neighborhoods are the same, and you're the only one with a 0. That's enough. We've got to do something. McCullough said about 1,000 words and drank 4 cups of coffee. Gabriella started out as a math teacher and automatically counted everything that happened around her. That made her feel better. Laurel she felt sorry for, both maternally and humanly. The entire faculty was aware of her troubled history. Now the absence of her grandmother added to the ordeal. The principal sighed and pressed the selector button. Now then, she said, prepare the orders. We'll be holding an extended council on the Pattinsons. What is today, Tuesday? Let's make it Friday, 6 o'clock at night. Hospitals always scared her. It was like a whole town with a gated community. While you could figure out where to go while you looked at the map, it was scary, but there was nowhere to go. Her grandmother was waiting. Laurel had a hard time finding the right building. It was the biggest and tallest. Not a hospital, but a whole metropolis. Now there was one last obstacle in the way, a nurse who had to follow instructions. No, children are not allowed either, said the woman in the white coat. I understand that you want to see your grandmother. I can give you the phone and you can make a video call. But she doesn't know how to use it. Laurel almost screamed. From resentment and helplessness, she wanted to weep. The girl had traveled a long way, all alone, to hear such a thing. Laurel could not understand why she, her own granddaughter, was not allowed to visit her grandmother. When her mother was in the hospital, the doctors even insisted that she come more often. But now? All right, the nurse gave up. I'll show you in, but just for a minute. Put on shoe covers and a mask, too. You have your own, don't you?
Laurel started to cry with resentment. How did she know she had to bring a mask and shoe covers to the hospital? All she had brought was lard sandwiches, just the way her grandmother liked them, and also a bag carefully folded by her mother. Slippers, a mug, a towel, and other small things. There were too many conventions in the world of adults. The girl could not get used to them.
Okay, sighed the nurse. Here, put it on, but do not cry. Let's go. I hope no one will see us, and I won't get hurt for this one. The woman led Laurel through the long corridors of the first floor. It was the second time the girl had been in such a large hospital, but she was still amazed at the scale. 3 years ago, when the accident happened to her mom, Laurel was taken to the ward by her grandmother, and now the girl has to wander the corridors on her own without an adult.
You understand. It's not my whim. Justified the nurse. It's the pandemic, the coronavirus. Do you know what it is?
No. Yes, Laurel answered. Of course you do. The girl loved learning through Zoom. She could devote many times more time to her mother and grandmother. And then when studying went back to the usual format, the opportunities faded. Now she had to get up at the crack of dawn to make breakfast, take out the trash, and help her mom get dressed. Here we go, the nurse said as she led her to the service elevator. Come on in, baby. They're charging us 3 hides for this coronavirus. You're lucky you're right next to the elevators. The rounds are over, no one will see us. Just make it quick, okay? Grandma was lying on the bed with her leg hanging from the ceiling. It was weird, but the room was warm and there were only 3 people in it. Grandma Vivian turned to her granddaughter as if she sensed her, and a smile immediately appeared on the old woman's gray face. What she had been through. Oh, Peggy, she said. Can you imagine? I twisted my ankle. Grandma, it's me, Laurel, the girl said. I brought sandwiches.
The nurse let them talk for a few minutes and went to check on the other patients. She would adjust someone's pillow, give someone a bottle of water. Laurel thought what a hard job it was. She didn't want to work in a hospital. She had a dream, a completely different dream.
Grandma, does it hurt a lot? The girl asked. Well, the old woman waved her hand. It will heal. And when I saw you, I thought of Peggy again. How is she? As Laurel walked toward the subway, she felt very tired. She had homework to do, and then she had to give her mom a massage. If she didn't exercise her legs, they wouldn't work. Suddenly her cell phone rang, and a familiar number popped up. Laurel, don't worry, the teacher said. Gabrielle's having a big council meeting Friday night. You should come with your mom. But you know that, the girl sighed. She was tired of telling everyone that a wheelchair was not an all-terrain vehicle, and therefore her mother would not be able to climb up to the 2nd floor. Laurel, don't worry, the teacher continued. Gabriella knows. We'll be meeting on the 1st floor. She told our men to help. Mom's going to be there for sure. I'll call her too, okay? It's hard to live without a dream, and Laurel had one. When the girl got off the subway, she suddenly froze in front of a billboard. On it were 3 ballerinas, frozen in the most graceful movement imaginable. For a few minutes, Laurel stood admiring them, unable to move. She wanted to be a ballerina too. She had everything she needed for that. Long legs, a slender body, excellent stretching. But when would she go to class? The school advertised various clubs and sections, and ballet also called, but warned that the selection, very strict. Of course, Laurel would have passed. But where would her family find the money to buy her special shoes and skirt? Who would drive her to the other side of town? Apparently, the dream would remain a dream. Laurel could only put her feet up and stretch in her room, imagining she was studying ballet and admiring ballerinas on her phone. The drive to and from the hospital took over 3 hours. It was already 9 o'clock at night, and there was still so much to do.
Peggy tried not to show her despair to anyone. At some point, she'd pulled the black card, and her life had been a mess ever since. Trouble started with Vincent, swearing his love for so many years and then running away. Then the accident. She still couldn't believe that such a ridiculous accident could wipe out all her plans and hopes for the future. Now her mother was in trouble, and there was nothing she could do to help.
Peggy felt like a doll with something broken. She couldn't feel her legs at all, despite such prolonged treatment. But problems, as it turns out, were enough. So it was today, a call from school. Instead of helping her, instead of caring for her, they want to take her child away from her. You could hear it on the first floor. The key turns in the lock. Her daughter is back. Finally, how is she? Peggy asked when Laurel appeared in the doorway.
She's lying down. The girl shrugged.
Wait, did you talk to her? Did they let you in? Yes, Laurel said. But it's a secret, don't tell anyone, since the woman laughed. Laurel was the only joy in Peggy's life. Looking at her, she knew that everything was worthwhile. But now she was her only support, too. Who would try to keep them apart is beyond me. I got a call from the school, Peggy said. They say they can't live without me. They're expecting me to come over Friday night. You think about it. It's like the weekend is starting, and I have to go home. And they decided to take me out. I know, Laurel replied. Are you going to eat pancakes? I'll make them real quick. Peggy watched her daughter kneading the batter and couldn't get enough of it. Yeah, the kid had to grow up fast. On the other hand, she's so independent. She can cook, clean, do her own laundry. If they had a little more money, it would be possible to order ready-made food right at home. At least the girl was understanding of all of the trials that fell to her lot.
Did you do your homework? Peggy asked. Do you want me to help you? No, Mommy, don't, Laurel answered. I can do it all by myself.
This independence, on the one hand, pleased, but on the other, be frightened. It wouldn't be long before she'd be out of the house. And she has to think about how to prepare for this time. Just recently, she was a strong and independent woman. She worked as a deputy director of construction, personally traveled to the sites and controlled everyone and everything. And now she can't even control her own limbs.
Oh, Mom, they won't take me away, will they? Laurel suddenly asked.
What do you mean? Peggy was surprised. Who will? Those people at school. The class teacher told me you can't do parenting. Don't worry, sweetie, Peggy replied. You gotta fight till the end. You can't give up. Put the pancakes over here and I'll wrap carrots in them. Yeah. The tricky thing about her injury was that any careless movement could cause unbearable pain. Now she had raised her arms too high and a pulse pierced her entire body. Even her legs hurt, though she couldn't feel them at all. Peggy was instantly pale and sweat appeared on her forehead. Reese. Mommy, come on, Laurel said. I'll wrap it myself. Okay, Peggy agreed. Hand me my pills. If it weren't for the painkillers, she'd have gone crazy a long time ago. Peggy swallowed one pancake with difficulty and then turned around and went to her room. When she bought this apartment, it seemed to her luck. 3 rooms, first floor, not the worst neighborhood. But now, after a year of living in the suburbs, the dead end was more and more clearly visible. The money was spent on medical treatment, not even enough for a normal stroller.
Oh, Mommy, I need to massage my legs, Laurel said.
Nah, don't, Peggy sighed. Why don't you get some rest?
Hey, Mom, you're not giving up, are you? Seriously asked her daughter.
Of course not. Okay, come on. She had never asked Laurel to help. But the clever girl had watched carefully the expensive resuscitator who had come a few times a year ago and had memorized his movements. He kneaded her legs as she lay on the bed, rubbing her muscles. It wasn't easy for the girl, of course, but Laurel tried. Now she was visited only by a free doctor, and from him she heard only regrets. But she was grateful for that. It was 11 p.m. was another shift coming to an end. Easy walked to the entrance to flip the sign to closed and lock the lock. Suddenly, someone yanked the door open sharply. So sharply that she couldn't hold it. Night visitors, come to think of it. No, darling, you'll have to find somewhere else to have fun. It's closed. You. She said in the nastiest voice she could muster. No, my princess, the tipsy man replied snidely. 1 more minute. We have to work until the last customer. Get out, the princess is not in the mood today. Replied Easy, pushed the uninvited guest and quickly closed the door. She felt better immediately. Doing bad things to people was a wonderful thing. It was only at times like this that she forgot for a second how worthless and miserable her life was. But there was no one to blame for that. She had backed herself into a corner. Easy loved trading, but there was nothing else she could do. Since she was 16, she'd been behind various counters selling beer and kayaks, gloves and eyeglasses, moving further and further up the sales career ladder. But in this stall, proudly called a pavilion, she was stuck. Why didn't you serve me? I asked a fat man standing behind her counter reproachfully. She hadn't even noticed he'd come in. quiet as always, just before closing time. How does he manage to do this every time? I'm closed, Easy answered, but in a less confident tone. 11 o'clock at night is closed, Rich. I'll give you that, closed. Go get him. Come on, Adrian demanded. The shop girl had no choice but to rush to the entrance, open it, and go out into the street. In the street, illuminated by lanterns, Easy easily recognized the wobbling figure of the guest. He had not gone very far. Come back, she shouted. The princess changed her mind. He moved slowly, wobbling, but did not even turn around. He only waved his hand, saying, "Leave me alone." Maybe he was afraid she'd beckon him to close the door. Yeah, she's in for a world of hurt. So this is how we pay our debts. Adrian yelled at her when she came back alone. I forgive you for everything, by the way. And you, well, I'm sorry, Adrian. I'm sorry. Izzy answered him and even smiled. At least he didn't hit her this time. The old bruises on her face had just healed, and she didn't want to get new ones in their place. Look at me, said the owner and delved into the receipts. He came every 3 days for the proceeds, trusting no one else to handle the money. I'll forgive you this time, all right? Easy tried to remember where this life had started. Austin, as they say, her common-law husband, had gotten her a job in this pavilion. He himself worked as a loader, and she got a place behind the counter. Ira was then stupid, naive, did not do accounting at all. And Adrian was different, liked everything. The 2x2 schedule, the salary, and the atmosphere. But Austin disappeared one day after a year of working together, and then she learned a terrible word: inventory. Adrian found a huge shortage, $500,000. Izzy could not even believe that such a large sum could be stolen in such a store. But the owner was not to change his mind. He was somehow sure that it was Izzy and her boyfriend who had stolen his money. The shortfall had been pinned on her. Adrian said, haughtily, "Thank Austin. Thank your failed husband." The owner fired the second shift, leaving Izzy alone in the company of a disenfranchised loader. They didn't stay long and changed almost every month. The saleswoman now kept a close eye on the money from the cash register. She wrote everything down and checked the receipts, but her debt was melting too slowly. In 2 years, Adrian had only written off half the money. She had to work 12 hours at the counter to pay off her debts. Only one day off, Sunday, kept her warm. Then she could come to work not at 9 in the morning, but at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Kind of like a day off. "Have you forgotten where I got you?" Adrian asked. "Have you forgotten my kindness? I could have turned you in to the police, you and Austin." "Adrian, come on," Izzy said. It's been so long. You're going to be working me hard and hard. Did you see Austin sneaking money out of the cash register?" "I did, and I didn't say a word. So you were in on it with him. I haven't forgotten anything." Izzy sighed. It was a shame not only to get such a large debt, but also to lose her admirer overnight. He quietly packed up their room and left. At least he called her. She's changed since then, too. All I had to do was piss off the customers. The only people who come here are those who have nowhere else to go. Once I yelled at an old lady who couldn't find a penny, and it was over. It made my heart feel good. So that Peggy could attend the meeting, the principal decided to hold it in the auditorium. It was the only place where a person in a wheelchair could get in without any problems. Looking at the girl's mother, Gabriella felt both pity and fear. If it were up to her, she wouldn't have looked at the half-paralyzed woman at all. She had to get this done quickly and move on. "But dear colleagues," Gabriella said, "let's not waste any time. Let's deal with the Petrov situation. This is the 3rd time we have been instructed to check the family's condition and make a conclusion as to whether Peggy Petrova is capable of fulfilling the duties of a parent. For the 3rd time, Peggy felt disgusted. School is only a 5-minute walk from home, but they seemed to her like a march to Calvary. First, 2 locals carried her down the stairs in a wheelchair for 50 rubles and almost dropped her. Then she forced up hills and slowed down on descents to get to school. Laurel kept trying to help, but where can she go? A little girl cannot cope with a big stroller. We're getting alarming signals, the principal continued. In fact, Laurel has been left to her own devices. She not only has to support herself, but also, pardon me for being blunt, her infirm mother. While we all deplore Peggy's situation, we need to. Let's not be rude. Put the children first. Is the psychologist here? When they were invited to with their daughter was indeed crowded. Some pedagogue could well cope behind the rows of soft seats. Laurel, tired after the school day and the transitions with her mother, almost dozed off in her seat. At first, Peggy wanted to get up and resent her. Then she remembered that she was confined to a wheelchair and decided to keep quiet. "The child's emotional state is alarming," said the girl, obviously a psychologist. "I conducted a series of tests for anxiety, depression, goal setting." "No, what conclusions?" suddenly asked a full man in a jacket who was sitting on one of the chairs. "The psychological state is extremely unstable," answered the psychologist. "The child is obviously under great stress, which can be explained by the situation in the family. There is a complete mismatch between age and behavioral roles." The psychologist said a lot of other clever things, the general sense of which was that Peggy had put too much responsibility on her only daughter, and that she herself, therefore, was enjoying the situation. It was outrageous, but Peggy knew how to keep her emotions in check, especially in a situation like this, where she had to be patient. Then the class teacher, who had not been particularly fond of Laurel from the beginning, spoke. Then the representative of the PA made a denunciatory speech which surprised Peggy. She continued to keep silent, though it was getting harder and harder to hold back. Finally, Laurel got a word in edgewise. "What's going on?" the girl asked. "Why are you guys talking about us like this? My mother and grandmother and I are doing just fine. It would be better if you helped." "Laurel," interrupted the principal. "We don't think your mom is capable of parenting." "But Gabriella," objected the girl. "She's getting better. She's doing much better. Mommy's been practicing every day. Yes, it's hard without Grandma, but we're not going to give up." "Why are we listening to her?" slammed his fist on the table with a full man who had been silent until now. "As we decide, so it will be." There was a murmur in the hall. The teachers were arguing. Obviously, they had to solve such cases not often. It's one thing when parents abuse alcohol and don't take care of their children. It's quite another if the mother is just in trouble, and she's reacting so calmly. "Nay, can I say something?" Peggy finally asked. "Do I get a defense or not?" "Yes, please," Gabriella nodded. "We are listening attentively." "I'm going through a difficult time right now," Peggy said. "You can't prepare for something like this. There are so many problems. But I can tell you I'm not giving up hope. I'm not giving up. I have a plan to make things right." Petrova, the man in the jacket, interrupted her. "You tell us one thing. Are you taking those drugs now? Don't make me say that word out loud in front of the children." "No," Peggy replied. "It was getting harder and harder to stay calm. The very drug you don't want to say has been out of stock for 6 months, and I've decided to give it up myself." The man was embarrassed. He was quickly going through the papers on the table in front of him. He rubbed his head with both hands and looked from Gabriella to Peggy. He opened his mouth to say something, but then he was embarrassed. "I'm asking one thing," Peggy said, "to build on the success. Give us some time. I'll get a nurse, and Laurel will get an assistant. I'll knock on every door to get us help." "It's just," the man in the jacket started to say, but the principal interrupted him. 2 weeks, Gabriella said. 2 weeks to correct the deficiencies. Otherwise, the removal of the child is inevitable." All the teachers raised their hands, almost unanimously. "Unanimously," the principal said in a satisfied voice. "The board decided to recognize the family as a dangerous situation, to give a period of 2 weeks to eliminate the shortcomings that have been pointed out. So the Petrovs are no longer detained. Help Peggy up or get out in the hall. On to other matters, colleagues." "Mommy, don't cry," Laurel pleaded as they stood in the hallway. Don't cry. Let's go. You and I have a lot to do. We need to stretch your legs." "Wait," Peggy said, wiping away her tears. "Wait a couple more minutes. I haven't said everything I need to say yet." Just then the door to the schoolroom opened, and the principal came out. She walked briskly, not looking back, but it was impossible to keep up with a wheelchair in the narrow hallway. Peggy moved nimbly toward her, working her arms vigorously. She must have never moved so fast in a wheelchair before. Gabriella saw her and tried to change her trajectory, but it was too late. "A word, ma'am?" Peggy asked. The principal tried to go, but the woman nimbly grabbed her arm. "How can you say no to a wheelchair user? Just a few words." "No, okay," Gabriella gave in after a brief maneuvering. "I'm listening." "What kind of show is this?" The woman was outraged. "I will complain. I'll go all the way to the top. You'll all be fired, do you hear me?" Surprisingly, The director reacted calmly to the threat. She adjusted her jacket, looked at Peggy expressively. "Listen to me, please," Gabriella said. "A child should have a childhood. It's not just about her becoming your nurse. It's about you two. You know what we're talking about, don't you?" Her hands were tired, and her palms were blistered. She'd noticed that experienced strollers wore gloves, but for some reason she didn't. She just hadn't quite gotten used to the idea that infirmity was permanent, and you have to live with it. The girl just felt devastated. Teachers so mundanely decided her fate, as if it was a car or another inanimate object. "Look, we're out of oil," Peggy said. "It might be a good idea to go to the store. It's on the... No need, Mom," Laurel said. There's that evil woman. She'll make fun of you again." "No, let's go," Mom demanded. "Let her say all the nasty things to my face. If she has the guts to get to the store, you had to cross the road and the curb." In front of the pavilion was a special lowering of the sidewalk, but exactly in this place someone put a huge car. Not to go around and not to go around. Laurel came closer and looked for a plate with a phone number. Under the windshield was an ironic inscription. "Is my car in the way?" "Sorry, Mom. Let's go around," Laurel said. "No," said Peggy. "We could turn around and get in. Let's try it." Legacy commenced. The woman must have lacked experience as a wheelchair user. For several minutes she tried to climb the curb, but to no avail. Eventually, she moved further down the path and found an undercut of the curb that wasn't blocked by a car. These movements had completely exhausted her. She literally couldn't feel her arms. She needed a break. There was a convenient ramp to the store, which Peggy negotiated with the help of her daughter. Together, they were able to make their way through the transparent door. Old man inside, there were a few customers. Old men and old women, leisurely comparing prices and looking for something cheaper. No way. ESI picturesquely splashed her hands when she saw Laurel and her mom on the stroller. "They're my regulars. It's been a long time since your feet have been here, Queen Mother." Peggy thought her daughter's stories about this woman were exaggerations. Now she could see for herself that they were real. The saleswoman kept going, as if in a hurry to tell all the crude jokes she'd made about wheelchair users. Peggy was literally dumbfounded by this torrent of barbs. "I thought that after our first meeting you would never set foot here again," she continued, smiling wryly. Oh, I'm sorry. There are legs, but they're kind of gone." Crude jokes, which she could have just ignored, were suddenly painful to Peggy. She felt a terrible urge to respond in such a way as to silence the saleswoman, to say what she thought about the insolent brat who had no one else to take it out on. But I didn't have the strength. Even a small line of customers could not stop the flow of snide remarks. She was both punching out the goods and humiliating her customer at the same time. "Now, dear," Peggy said instead in the calmest voice she could muster, "you can see that this is a person with a disability. I need a packet of butter. Show a little respect." "Who's going to respect me?" Azee replied sharply. She wants the butter. I've been standing here for 12 hours a day. I don't even have time to go to the bathroom." Because of the saleswoman's behavior, the line in front of the counter began to accumulate. The small pavilion could hardly fit 10 people. In the evening, there were many visitors, and there might even be a queue. For some reason, Peggy wanted to demonstrate her legal awareness. After all, people with disabilities should be served without waiting in line. Why not demand that the slut obey the law? "No, dear," she said. "I have the right not to stand in line. You must serve me on a priority basis. Come over here and sell me butter, only not to stand in line." Azee acted surprised. "I wondered why you were always sitting. If you don't want to stand in line, don't. It seems to me that if you wanted to, you couldn't." The few customers looked at Peggy. She couldn't take it anymore and cried. The saleswoman had hit a sore spot. The woman would never really be able to get out of her chair, no matter how much she wanted to convince herself otherwise. She could hire the best doctors, buy the most expensive medications. It wouldn't help. Her daughter approached the counter and looked at the saleswoman defiantly. "You know what? You're actually the one who's never going to be able to get up." "Me?" Azee marveled. "Look, I'm standing." And she took a few steps forward and backward to dispel any doubts. "You think you're standing. You're not really standing, you're lying down." "At the bottom." "At the bottom?" Azee asked. The girl who never responded to her barbs, as if she were cutting her without a knife. "You've given up," Laurel said. "That's why you're acting like this. And you can't give up." "Never. Me." Azee snapped. "Surrendered. What do you know about it, you little thing?" Yes, the girl nodded. I can see you don't like working here. I can see you're like a fly behind a glass, fighting and fighting. My mom's strong. You're not even close. Choke on your butter, we're leaving. The girl turned around, grabbed Peggy's stroller by the handles and started pushing it toward the exit. There were claps at her back as the few customers applauded. They must not have liked Easy and her jokes either. The saleswoman herself stood frozen with her hand outstretched toward the refrigerator. The girl's words, harmless at first glance, hurt her deeply and deeply. Why are we clapping? Well, she said after a pause. I have no flies here, not a single one. Only bees fly to honey, you know. The 7 steps leading to the first floor were her Everest. How do you climb them if your legs won't obey you? Because they were late for a meeting in the store, there were no one willing to help her climb them for a reasonable fee. After the humiliation of the last hour, Peggy wanted to show her strength of character. May, can you lift the chair? She asked her daughter. Bring it into the apartment. Yes, but... Peggy didn't listen to the girl, grabbed the handrail against the wall and began to climb up. It was clumsy, but what can you do? You had to get used to it sometime. There was a flaw in her plan. Once on the platform, she was completely exhausted, and now she had to get back into the chair. Laurel couldn't lift her crippled body. She had already struggled to get the stroller in. We're out of oil, said Peggy, lying on the platform with her head up. She smiled. Mommy, why did we move here? The girl asked. It's not a good place for a handicapped person. That's true, agreed Peggy. We moved here because Mommy ran out of money. Give me a hand. I'm going to storm my wheelchair. With great difficulty and with her daughter's help, she managed to climb back into the wheelchair. She was sweating from the exertion. Peggy expected her body to respond with pain to such an ordeal, but today her body was responding calmly to all the challenges and hardships. When she sold her previous apartment and paid off her debts with the bank, there wasn't much money left, and the first floor seemed like a great option to her. Mom, what did you say about a nurse? Suddenly asked the girl, opening the door. Where are we going to get the money for her? That was just a figure of speech, Peggy said. I've bargained for 2 weeks. I'll think of something. Your mom used to be good with people, you know. The girl sighed. She seemed to take the situation more seriously than her mother. It was only now starting to dawn on Laurel that they might be separated. Who would take care of her mother? Who will stretch her legs, cook breakfast and dinner? The girl became very sorry for herself and her mother. But you cannot give up. You need to think. She just taught the sales clerk, who was 3 times her age, not to Let's ask Daddy for help, Laurel suggested. I wish he was with us, or get a room somewhere nearby. You don't have a father. Peggy was angry and her cheerful mood faded. He left you. Don't you dare say his name in my house. But Mom, they won't give up. The girl continued. They won't give up. Peggy thought her daughter needed some kind word of encouragement, to encourage, to help, to participate. But the words just wouldn't make sense in her head. How could she explain that her worthless father wouldn't help her, not even by crawling to him on her knees? That was exactly what Peggy could theoretically do for her daughter. Tomorrow's the weekend, Mom said. We'll sit down together and figure out how to get out of this. And we have to go to Grandma's house too. Can you do that? No, of course, said the girl. But go on, take a break. I'll make sandwiches. I have some inspiration. Of course, the woman was lying. Her arms were very tired after the physical exertion, but she wanted to show herself that she could still do something, that she was a mother, not a burden. With the board on her lap, Peggy could cook something, like slicing bread and buttering it. It took effort to stretch it over 4 slices of bread. There was no meat either, so Peggy finally chopped 2 sausages she could reach in the refrigerator. At times, the pain receded, and Peggy could even hope for the best. And on this night, when her maimed body wasn't giving her any trouble, it was her soul that decided to suffer. Who was she kidding? She can't hire a nurse for herself or a babysitter for her daughter. It's not even that Laurel was brilliant at all the housework. The problem is something else. Poverty is her biggest ailment. As soon as you fall out of the world of successful people, poverty is, if you're young and healthy, it can be cured. But for the infirm and the elderly, Peggy thought about the fact that winter would soon come, and she didn't have the money to buy her daughter a new jacket and boots. Maybe she really should give up. They say that everyone should help the infirm. On paper, maybe that's true. But in life, it's the other way around. Agree with that soulless principle and ask her for help. Maybe there's a boarding school where children can stay with infirm parents. Laurel. Peggy called out, chasing away her bleak thoughts. Come and have some tea. Gail hated the subway. Every time she went down to the subway, the girl felt an incomprehensible fear. Before the accident, her mother used to take her by car. She is an excellent driver, and together they would go to the swimming pool or to the supermarket, where you don't have to talk to the salespeople at all. Sometimes their grandmother joined them. The three of them had a lot of fun. Once again, the girl remembered that fateful day. How her mom sat her on the booster, buckled her in, pressed the gas. According to the rules, children are forbidden to travel on the front seat. But she and Mom were so inseparable, they ignored that requirement. My mom had a big French car which she affectionately called Ducia. Laurel's fondest memories were associated with this car. How they went to St. Petersburg for a weekend and wandered along the beautiful streets, admired the embankment. How they went to the ice arena and watched hockey, and then a long wander around the floors of the parking lot because they forgot where they left their car. How we went to the water park together, where we rode down the high slides together on a cotton candy. Now it's all in the past. To Laurel's daily worries was added a trip to the hospital. But simply put, a trip. First, to boil Grandma's favorite borscht and pour it into a jar. Then to ride the third trolleybus to the subway. Then another 20 minutes of shaking deep above the ground. And then, finally, the hospital. But no one is allowed inside. Quarantine. In the car, Laurel dozed off and saw the day again. The crossroads that took Ducia and her mother's health. The girl knew that the car was an automatic box. It means that you only need to press the pedal, and you don't have to pull the lever. Why did she then tell her mom that it was okay to drive? When the girl got out of the subway and walked towards the hospital, she remembered well where the building she needed was. She tried to give herself a cheerful and carefree look. Downstairs, Laurel met the same kind-hearted nurse who had taken her to her grandmother's room, despite her inhibitions. "Hello," she smiled. "I'm here to see Vivian. Remember me? I wish I could go up and talk to her. My mom and I miss her terribly." "You can't," said the nurse, checking the list and sighing. "No way." "Nay, should I pass the soup?" Laurel asked and picked up her bag. She was ready to say no, but she was still upset. "No, honey, it won't work," said the woman in the white coat. Here, there's a thing, me. What's wrong?" "Your grandmother's gotten worse," the woman said. "Tonight she was transferred to the intensive care unit. But don't worry, and don't worry. It has nothing to do with the trauma." "Bish, what does it have to do with?" Laurel asked. She felt the floor go out from under her feet, and then the nurse took her by the shoulder. "Coronavirus be damned," she sighed. She tested positive. Her SATs are low. "You know what it does to old people?" "And you're not mistaken." Laurel asked, hopefully. "Maybe you're confusing my grandmother with someone else?" "If only," replied the nurse. "Do you know how good my memory is? And her name is so rare, Vivian. That was my grandmother's name too. But you hang in there. God willing, she'll pull through. Me. What am I gonna do?" "I'll write your phone number right now." The woman in the white coat took a piece of paper and scribbled a few numbers on it. "Here. This is the duty post in the red zone. You can call periodically, inquire. If they don't answer the first time, call again. There's a lot of patients, You can't keep track of them all." Low and dejected, Laurel walked back to the subway. In her bag dangled a useless can of borscht, which she had so lovingly prepared. She understood about the intensive care unit. It was a place where people were put when they got sick. But what is saturation? And why was Grandma's saturation low? She should have asked the nurse all these questions instead of leaving. And most importantly, would her ordeal ever end? Ever? Only Daddy could help her. She pulled out her phone and hit the call button on Messenger. Silence. He hadn't answered her yesterday either, but she had called him late at night. The girl still couldn't remember the difference between her city and Africa. Papa never told her what time it was in the city where he was. But Laurel pressed the call button again and again. Silence. Not one funny picture, not one smiley face. Daddy was gone. That hurt worse than a knife. After all these years, he'd appeared in her life and then disappeared again. But her heart refused to believe her father was devious. No, something had happened to him. Just like Mom, just like Grandma. It's just a pity that no one will help him there in the faraway land of Africa. He's all alone there. Their usual conversation always took the same turn. She would ask Daddy to come back to her, and he would explain at length why it was impossible. He had a very beautiful voice, like a newscaster or a politician. The girl tried to change her father's mind, refusing to believe that adults could be so stupid and vindictive. "It's hard for me to come back, Laurel," now sighed the father in such cases. "I hurt your mother terribly. I hurt her to death. She'll forgive me." Laurel repeated to herself over and over again. After all, her mother, so strong and successful, so lively and purposeful, always forgave her. Her daughter. Was her daddy so very different? If he had returned a little sooner, nothing would have happened to him there, in the faraway land of Africa. Listener immersed in gloomy thoughts, Laurel went down to the subway. It was indeed a mechanism that always worked. The trains underground, like giant toys, kept moving forward, and it seemed to her that these huge, soulless machines didn't care what happened to the occupants. Like escalators, they would keep moving, no matter what happened outside. Gabriella rewrote her own letter of resignation for the third time. The calculation did not allow her to resign just like that. Otherwise, she would be given a regular pension, not a civil servant's. And the difference was enormous. The principal did not want to participate in this play, which was played by McCullough. Removing a child from a family is always stressful, but the Petrovs case was special. In her long career as a teacher, she had seen many families that were troubling. She was impressed by the mother who left her young schoolchildren at home alone, while she herself organized multi-day trips to guests, or a father who, for some reason, decided that his son should eat sunshine and vegetable broth. But these were all extremes, inevitable in huge cities. The Petrov situation seemed to demand a very different approach. Not the kind of formal approach that the administration suggested, but a creative one, raised on the ideals of the Soviet Union. The principal struggled to remember what could have been offered at that time. Perhaps an apartment would have been found for them, and they would have found the crippled mother some work. We lost. The official from the administration was terribly angry with her after Friday's council. He said a lot of ugly words, scolded for indecision and incompetence. What does he know? How long had he worked at the school? So Gabriella firmly decided to leave. Good thing her seniority and age allowed her to ask for resignation. If they said 2 weeks, that's fine, the official said, waving his hand. So, on the same Friday, come as a group. Take the district inspector. Draw up the most vicious, the most defamatory report, and take the child away. Is that clear? The principal still couldn't write 6 lines without mistakes. Resignations were supposed to be handwritten. As an experienced teacher, it was completely incomprehensible to her. Why such a mundane document would not be entrusted to a computer? After making another mistake, Gabriella grabbed the paper and tore it up in a rage. It felt better. Once she was alone with her thoughts, 2 antagonists appeared alternately in her mind. McCullough, the administration official for whom numbers were the most important thing, and Peggy Petrova, who demanded human feelings and participation from her. Each of them is right in their own way. The official is worried about something irreparable happening. When a person is in trouble, he is capable of anything. And in this case, it's better to be reassured than to rely on risk. A woman in a wheelchair wants to be helped. She has every right to be helped, but by a strange coincidence, Gabriella can't give her a hand. The petition kept failing. This time she cut off on the first line, writing forgiveness. Very symbolic. She really needed forgiveness. What should we do? The girl must have relatives. She has to. At least a father. If McCullough wants her to bring in a policeman, why not ask him for help? These cops have a lot of options. The duty officer patiently told her of no change in her grandmother's condition. The weight was weighing on Laurel, but it was even more difficult for her mother. She called the hospital too, but it looked different. She dialed the numbers and stared at the screen for a long time, hesitated to press the green button. Laurel stood at the entrance to the Divine, waiting for one of the adults. In front of strangers, this rascal will certainly not dare to exercise in wit. Although the girl vowed not to go to the store with an angry saleswoman, there was nowhere to go. They had too many tasks for the weekend, and in the evenings Laurel practiced pass in front of the mirror. So going to a normal store in the neighborhood would mean giving up the class. And today it was vital for her to do stretching, followed by port-de-bras, plies, and battements. It would help take her mind off her thoughts because of Daddy's silence. She didn't know what to think anymore. After a minute of waiting, some uncle in a long coat approached. He smiled at her and carefully opened the door. "What? It won't budge?" he asked. "Come in, little girl." When she saw the girl at the door, Easy opened her mouth for another witticism, but stopped herself. It was the first time she'd ever seen a man in a coat, and her main rule is not to attack strangers. Anyways, what if Adrian had sent him to check up on her? Judging by the decent coat, he's not from around here. I'll have to bite my tongue. May come in, I'll serve you, she said as friendly as possible. And you, girl, don't steal anything. No, the man waved his hands. He took the saleswoman's barb as a joke. First, the girl, or you really need to keep an eye on them. What are you going to buy, little girl? Oh, I need a lot of things, said the girl. And beets and carrots. Let's you first. No, the man insisted. I'm in no hurry. Do you want me to help you? Satisfied, Laurel left the store. What a polite uncle. I wish your daddy was like that, kind and polite. Her phone rang. Laurel. Mom screamed. Hurry back. The girl rushed home. It seemed like a short run, but Laurel thought she was moving too slowly. That morning, Peggy decided she was going to move forward no matter what. Yes, getting out of the wheelchair wouldn't work, but now, in the 21st century, it was possible not to leave the house at all. When she was still in the hospital, she was given brochures and flyers where disabled people like her sat smiling in front of computers and laptops. She too would take up such work. She still had a nice laptop with a pretty apple on it from her successful days as deputy director. Peggy had thought about selling it several times, but hadn't dared. And it wasn't just that they wouldn't give a good price for this. This laptop remained the only window into the world of her past, where she was a successful and truly driven woman. Discover the world of remote work, the man broadcast from the screen. You can not only earn, but also realize yourself as a successful, in-demand specialist. Enough said, Peggy said impatiently. What is there to do? Why hadn't she thought of doing something like this before? Hours at the laptop allowed her to distract herself from sad thoughts. Her Laurel is only 10 years old. In just 2 weeks, it would be 11. Need to pick herself up and labor from home. Hundreds of articles told how people in much worse condition than her made money. The main thing is not to give up. You can ask someone for help. You could complain. A good mood enveloped her, and sometimes she forgot even about her ailment. But then despair would come over Peggy in a black wave, and that was the worst of it. You can get used to the inconveniences of life. Peggy is lucky that at least she can support herself, and her daughter doesn't have to do the most humiliating work. With the last of their money, they remodeled a toilet and bathroom so that a person with disabilities doesn't feel completely helpless. But the rest of a kitchen set where she could make something more than sandwiches cost an insane amount of money. If she'd known she'd be in this situation, she definitely would have lived more frugally, more sensibly, without spending too much, trying to invest in her own future. Searching for a job on the internet, the woman was so engrossed that she didn't notice how lunch passed. She never called the hospital, but she did manage to find something that looked like a job. She wrote reviews, filled out cards, and did other things like that. Her feeling was going just fine. She was just disconnected from reality. At times, she was distracted by extraneous sounds, like small footsteps in the hallway or rain outside the window. What was it? She didn't want to leave her occupation, but curiosity took over. She rode out into the hallway in her wheelchair and marveled. Small streams of water ran down the walls. It had already completely covered the floor. A newspaper and Laurel slippers were floating. The main leak was in the kitchen area. Peggy didn't even dare go there. Lynn, don't panic. Just have to go upstairs and see which neighbor forgot to turn off the water. Now she'll get up and go, wait, she can't go upstairs, can she? Who do I call? The management company, of course. But in a year of living in this house, Peggy had never taken the time to get to know the local utility company. Peggy drove back to her room. It was still dry. 4 o'clock. Laurel should be on her way home by now. We should ask her to come sooner. After her daughter's call, Peggy came to her senses and pulled up her laptop. The main thing is not to get water on it. Found the phone number of the management company. Busy. Why did she have to go through all this trouble? This mom's call caught Laurel by surprise. What happened? Must be something with her grandmother. The girl ran down the street and looked around. Seems like everyone's a little coffee crazed this year. Vending machines, cafes, like mushrooms and there's only one store in the whole neighborhood. And it's on the way home from school. And she has to go in there every day listening to the nastiness. When you're in a hurry, time is slow on purpose. The universe is in no hurry. And now Laurel ran up to the traffic light and the green light was still not on. She wanted to run across the road, but the cars were moving in a continuous stream. The girl pressed the button again and again, but the signals did not want to change. Finally, green, you can run on it, the road is free. But only Laurel made a few steps. Near her, there was a squeal of tires. A cab car stopped right beside her. The driver was running a red light. The man felt it his duty to lower the side window and say, "Watch where you're going, asshole." He raised the window and was gone. And Laurel thought that it was drivers like that put her mom in a wheelchair. "You have to be more careful," the girl ran on. "Here is the house. It is good that they live on the first floor." The distance to the front door she covered in 2 jumps. "Mommy." The girl shouted, running into the house. A wave of heat and dampness hit her in the face, and her feet began to slap as if running through a puddle. Did Mom spill water? Laurel thought. Unlike, everything was in water. The walls, the ceilings, the floor. Her boots were instantly soaked with liquid. Nice to mastery. "Laurel, we have to collect it," Mom shouted. "Immediately collect." The girl rushed into the bathroom, took a bucket and a rag. But there was so much water that the bucket was instantly full. So she took a scoop and started scooping the water with it. The heavy bucket was so hard to lift to pour it into the toilet. "Mom, what's going on?" the girl asked. "We've been flooded, Laurel." Peggy managed to find the culprit. She was told over the phone that the faucet in the 4th floor kitchen caused the problem. The upstairs neighbors were at work. No one noticed the leak until it reached the 1st floor. Tensions everywhere, pouring from outlets, leaking from the walls, dripping from the ceilings. The emergency crew shut off the supply. Now they had no water either. Laurel took out at least 10 full buckets before the dustpan was useless. Then she began to collect water with a rag and wring it out. This struggle with the communal element went on for at least 2 hours. Squeezed out like her own rag to collect water, the girl fell to the floor. She was wet from work and fatigue. "The Laurel, get up," said the mother. Get up. You have to change your clothes. You'll get sick." I can't, Laurel replied. "No strength." Come on, daughter." Peggy looked at the damage. The already unpretentious apartment looked like a brothel. Wallpaper was peeling off the walls and ceiling. Doctor frames were swollen. Turning on electrical appliances was out of the question. And so, through the fault of a negligent neighbor, they found themselves in a most depressing situation. Laurel finally found the strength to get up. She took off her wet clothes and hung them on the radiator. "We should open the windows," Peggy said. "It'll get the air out quicker." "Just get dressed first." By 9 p.m., the management company came to the apartment. The engineer meticulously described all the damage. The kitchen, the corridor and grandmother's room. It is closest to the epicenter of the attack. Some of the furniture is in the dumpster. Peggy's and Laurel's rooms survived. The water only reached them through the floor without causing any damage. "Don't worry," said the man who identified himself as an engineer. "We will definitely help you restore everything, and we'll help you with the furniture." "Everything?" Laurel asked hopefully. "Yes," he nodded. "We'll wallpaper and whitewash the ceilings. It's our plumber, be damned. Badly hung the faucet." "Damn him. Could you start tomorrow?" Peggy asked. "The thing is, I'd love to," said the engineer. But, no. It takes 2 weeks for everything to dry. You can't do it sooner than that. It's the what." Peggy thought about the fact that laws can work, but only when they work against her. "I strongly disagree with your act," Peggy said. "We were flooded 2 days ago. Mel, you can file an objection." A week after the humiliating council, on Friday, the delegation showed up unannounced at Peggy's house. Laurel was at school, and that's a good thing. She would surely have yelled at these soulless, heartless women. The committee meticulously inspected the rooms, looked in closets, and the refrigerator. The 2 women kept marking something in their papers. "I wish you'd help me," Peggy said. How am I supposed to repaper the wallpaper? I have an allowance of $10,000. I can hardly live on that money." "If you can't do it, if you can't cope, just say so," said the guest. The mental strength that had come to Peggy not long ago was again on the verge of exhaustion. One thing that pleased her was that the pain in her back had not returned, even when she lifted her arms high above her head. It must have been that after the mental torment, physical suffering was simply impossible. "The girl's room is fine," the inspector summarized. But the common areas need urgent repairs." "Didn't you hear that?" Peggy asked. "I told you we're flooded. You go out in the entryway and there's water stains all over the place." I heard, the woman said. You didn't hear me. We need urgent repairs. Soap is soap. Start over. When Peggy was given the report, she began to read it carefully and make handwritten notes, which displeased the inspectors. Not a single line she left without caustic remarks and comments. At some point, the women accepted that they would not be able to leave quickly and began to wait. The deadline to eliminate the remarks is a week, said one of them. We need to change the wallpaper and the flooring. Bring your tools and I'll get started. Very funny, said one of the inspectors. We understand your situation perfectly well and humanly sympathize with you, but why should the child suffer? When Laurel got home, she saw her mom in tears. She didn't roll out into the hallway to greet her like she usually did. Sitting in front of her laptop, she was browsing some websites. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Mom, Laurel said. I called the hospital. Can you believe Grandma's already been disconnected from something? From what? Peggy asked fearfully. Is that it? I haven't figured it out, Laurel admitted. I thought she couldn't breathe, but now she can. No, thank God, Mom said. We should go see her. At least give her a message from us. No, I'll go tomorrow for sure. Promised Laurel. Mom, were you crying? Yes, my daughter. Mom, but you told me not to give up. That you have to be strong. Have you forgotten? No, I haven't forgotten, said Peggy, wiping away her tears. But sometimes it's okay to cry a little. The important thing, my dear, is to stop in time. Laurel went into the kitchen. The wooden floor had heaved and now resembled an obstacle course for toy cars. The air was still damp. The water had evaporated from the surfaces. She made her mother some tea and a couple of cheese sandwiches and brought them into the room. Laurel herself didn't want to eat. Mom, you're not going to give me to them, are you? The girl asked. No, dear. You and I will always be together, no matter what happens. Laved would by quickly, even too quickly. That Friday, Laurel decided not to go to school. If it was her last day at home, it was better to spend it with her mom. Besides, she had never skipped a class. It was time to make a simple breakfast, watch TV together. If the weather was nice, they could try to go outside. Laurel went to the kitchen, looked in the refrigerator. Not much. There were 3 eggs in the door and 2 mushrooms in the vegetable compartment. She also found a couple of sausages and a tiny piece of cheese. She beat the eggs, added the sliced sausages and mushrooms, topped it all with the rest of the ketchup, crumbled the cheese and poured it into the pan. It made a great omelet that tasted like pizza. I take it you didn't go to school? Mom asked, eating her breakfast. No, Laurel answered. I don't feel well. I understand, Mom nodded. If the school committee comes, they might take you away. Let's not think about bad things, she said. You'll still be able to visit me if you need to. Or I'll run away and come back to you. They were silent for a while. Laurel put the kettle on the stove. How good it is to have breakfast like this without hurry, to talk to a dear person. After all, it used to be like that, but it was her mother, not her, who worked on the streets. Would anyone think of separating them? Suddenly, the bell rang. 9:30 in the morning. Come and see, Mom said with a smile. On the doorstep stood a young man with a large box. Like a wizard, he rummaged through it, took out a package, and handed it to her. Delivery service, the young man replied. Here, sign here. But we didn't order anything. The girl was surprised. We have nothing to pay with. Strange, the address seems to be the same. Shrugged the courier. You don't need to pay, it's a prepayment. I too. I'll ask, Laurel replied and took a box. With it, she went to the kitchen. Her mother was sitting there, smiling strangely. Laurel had not seen her so satisfied and even happy for a long time. Open it, she said. Laurel took out the box, lifted the lid. Point shoes, the real ones white in color. The girl's hands trembled with excitement. She put them on her feet. They fit just right. She stood on her tiptoes and began to do the movements she had learned herself in front of the mirror. There wasn't much room in their narrow kitchen. Happy birthday, Mom said. Did you think I'd forgotten? Oh, Mom, thank you, Laurel replied. I forgot myself. But where did the money come? You won't believe it, daughter, said Peggy. I earned it myself on the internet. You saw that I was on my laptop for 2 weeks. It was a real miracle. Laurel rushed to the door to thank the courier, but he was already gone. Through the first floor window, she could see him dragging his box and checking with the navigator. What a job, the girl thought. He must be exhausted by evening. Did you think I didn't know your secrets? Mom winked at her. How can I tell you? Laurel shrugged. No, there's no secret. I always wanted to be a ballerina. No sooner had they finished their tea than a new bell rang. It was timid, even hesitant, as if the visitor was hesitant to come in. Peggy froze with her mug raised. Was it really that early? She asked. I thought they were coming tonight. Don't give up, Mom, the girl said. The bell rang again. Laurel went to the door and looked through the peephole. She expected to see Gabriella, her classmate, and other familiar people. Big deal, the school didn't show up. Instead of a huge delegation, there was a man standing there. Something about his face seemed familiar. It seemed that she had already seen his picture somewhere. Hello, Laurel said. Who do you want? Hello, P. The man whispered and smiled. May sent Daddy. The girl shouted, opening the door wide. What the hell is this? Adrian looked around his store and couldn't believe his eyes. What was his serf doing? On the door was a proud sign written in marker, Recount. When had it closed, all the aisles were filled with cardboard boxes, on which the same marker indicated the type of goods and their quantity. Some, with milk, kefir, and cheese, were carefully placed in refrigerators. What the hell is this? Adrian asked and grabbed Easy by the sweater. I'm asking you, what is this? Get your hands off me. I'm quitting, replied the salesgirl. Yeah, how dare you? Resented the owner. Here, take a look at this, said Easy, and handed him a whole notebook written in her hand. I've counted it all. There's a shortage, but it's not much. 3,000. I put it in the cash register. What do you think you're doing? Adrian said. His entire pavilion is only 50 square meters with the warehouse. That's exactly what he needs to sell alcohol. The basis of his prosperity. Adrian had squeezed the most out of this modest space. The goods are everywhere, in the refrigerators, on the counter, and even in the aisles. But another important part of his success is the reliable Easy, whose ex almost drove him into the world. Of course, in the 500,000, he wrote absolutely all the shortfall over the years of the store, but the uncomplaining saleswoman swallowed it. She didn't argue, she worked a double shift. Easy, let's talk. Adrian suddenly changed his anger into mercy. You have to give me 2 weeks' notice. I'll find a replacement. No, you won't, replied the saleswoman. We have an employment contract with you, remember? Adrian tried to make it look like he was complying with the law. Easy did indeed work for him officially, but since he couldn't afford a lawyer, he had to handle the paperwork himself. Had he missed the end of her contract? Easy, you can't do that, the landlord said. We can talk. I'll cancel some of your debt. ESC's face twisted. I've paid it all off. I'm leaving. Out of what if the police? Dren said hopefully. The court. Go ahead, replied the former saleswoman. She took off her apron, the only uniform her stingy employer had provided her with, and threw it on the floor. Opening the door, she slammed it hard, hoping to break the glass. But it helped. It would swing wide open, and he would walk in with a victorious gait. He'd hand out the presents. Peggy, realizing and forgiving, would rush to embrace him. But instead of his cheerful daughter, he sees a thin, haggard Laurel. Does she eat anything at all? Shabby wallpaper hung from the ceilings and walls. In the kitchen of the old, shabby apartment sat Peggy, sitting in her wheelchair. She covered her face with her hand in embarrassment. Of course, she'd once been so strong, so powerful and independent. Life had taken its toll on her. Vincent held out the bouquet he'd bought at the train station. Bright red roses, just the way she liked them. Nice waits. Here I am, he exhaled. I'm back. Peggy was silent. He could read a whole range of feelings in her gaze, but hate was not one of them. I wondered if she'd filed for divorce. That last time, 4 years ago, when she'd refused to see him, he'd snapped, found a job 3 miles away, and left. He hasn't been back home in over 3 years. A year ago, V-Contact offered him a new friend, with the same surname and familiar facial features. It turned out Laurel had grown up. They communicated for a year, and then he realized that he could no longer be away from his daughter, especially when a schoolmate called him and told him that he was wanted by the principal of the school where Laurel attends. True, he had not been told about Peggy's misfortune. Papa, I'm so glad, Laurel said. How about some tea? Peggy remained silent, and Vincent stood holding out the flowers. Then the girl took them and put them in a 3-liter jar. They didn't have a vase at home. She suddenly realized that she had never imagined meeting her father at all. There were almost no childhood memories of him. only of going to the movies and once eating ice cream. I'm sorry, Peggy, he said after a long silence. It's my fault. I gave in. Peggy was silent. Vincent wondered if his wife had filed for divorce. He certainly wouldn't have done it himself. On his passport, they were still husband and wife. An inner strength prevented Peggy from not only asking for help, but even accepting it. All she had to do was say 2 words about the state she was in. He would have flown in, rushed over. But she didn't say a word. If you won't forgive me for your own sake, then forgive me for your daughter's sake, Vincent asked. I can see it's not easy for you. I don't know, Peggy said. I don't know if you can stay with us, after all you've done. Or rather, what you haven't done, May. I don't know either, Vincent shrugged. Peggy's always been like that. If a man is strong, he measures others by himself. He sees any weakness as a betrayal. He'd always been weaker than she was. His wife's expressive silence hit him worse than any shout. He wanted to get up, to rush outside, and run to the airport, fly far away from here. But he felt in his gut that both his daughter and his wife needed his help. Why don't we vote? Laurel suggested it. Who's in favor of Daddy staying? I'm in favor. Peggy was silent. Laurel could see from her mom that she was hesitant. She wants to be a proud, independent woman, but they can't do it without Daddy. So he didn't fool her, he came. And just when she needed him most, who would dare separate them now? Me, too, Vincent said. I want to stay with you. If not right here, I'll get an apartment somewhere. I'll come and help out, take Laurel to school. She can do that all by herself, Peggy said sharply. You should have asked her if she had winter clothes and shoes. Yes, she does. Vincent shouted happily. And you and me, Laurel, we're going shopping, aren't we? And we'll take your mother, won't we? He looked hesitantly at Peggy's legs, covered with a blanket. He would have liked to ask what had happened and what the prospects were, but he was afraid of making his wife angry. Afraid she would change her mind and throw him out the door. If she wants to, he added hastily. You two go, the woman said. I'll allow it. I have things to do here. Gabriella was determined that the play called removal of the child from the family would take place without her. She didn't return calls from administration officials. She sent her letter of resignation by courier. She has every right not to visit the girl and not to tear her from the arms of her loving mother. Really, there's nothing else the principal can do. No, she asked not to let anyone in, said the receptionist. Gabriella is very ill. Out of my way. The authoritative voice was McCullough's, of course. He swung open the door to the headmaster's office and entered regally. The principal was, indeed, not well. The official waved her application, holding it up squeamishly with 2 fingers. Look at what she's up to. Care to explain? McCullough demanded. What is this? This. The principal interjected. My resignation. I'm resigning. It's my legal right. Oh, legal right. The official was raging. Right. So this is how you do my bidding. Coffee for us. He demanded, but no one came forward to do his bidding. McCullough could not understand why this obedient and uncomplaining woman was suddenly rebelling. He must bring the process to an end to take Laurel away from her negligent mother. What did it matter why she could not fulfill her duties? And then, at the last moment, the principal stabs him in the back at 6:00 p.m. I'm closing the office, she said, and I'm leaving, and to the Pattinsons. And I'm not going to the Pattinsons, the principal said. Period. Well, nothing, replied the official. Nothing. There will be teachers who will fulfill my assignment. And you, Gabriella, will be That day, Laurel finally felt like herself, a little girl. Yes, she had just turned 11, so she might as well be a little weaker than adults. Daddy, it turns out, doesn't know the city at all. Together with him, they searched for shopping centers on the internet, drove there, walked around. It seemed that Daddy wanted to catch up on all the years he had missed. Laurel couldn't relax and kept looking at the prices. How expensive everything was. But Daddy put his arm around her shoulders and told her it was nothing. That he could afford a lot of things. But the girl still tried to choose things cheaper. It's a great jacket, she persuaded her father. Very warm, but it's short for you. You, replied her father. Take it off immediately. Then there was a cafe where Dad ordered her a small cake with a candle. The animator sang congratulations to the whole shopping center, and the visitors clapped her from the tables. Quite sincerely. They didn't get home until the evening. Laurel was happy. She hadn't gotten so many presents in a long time. Could it really be true? Well, Sam, there was a noise in the entrance. The girl recognized a familiar voice. It seemed to shout psychologist from school. Around her gathered a whole delegation, which was cramped in the corridor of an old panel house. But the mother, sitting on a wheelchair, steadfastly held the defense. "And I'm telling you, she's not here." She said irritably. "She's out walking, and I won't let you into the apartment." "Then I'll call the police," answered the psychologist. "And they'll take you to the police station for hiding your daughter from us." "I'm not hiding from anyone," Laurel said. "Hello, here she is," said the psychologist happily. "We'll make a report, take her away," Vincent felt afraid. Where were they going to take his daughter? He'd come back to her after all these years to lose her all at once. He stepped forward and covered Laurel with his large figure. The educators looked at him in surprise. "And who are you?" one of them asked. "I'm the father," he replied. "No, how dare you?" Peggy shouted. "We're a happy family, woman," the psychologist said arrogantly. If you bring a man home, it's not always a sign of well-being." "This is my husband," said Peggy. "My passport," the psychologist demanded. Vincent took out a document and handed it to the delegation. Each member of the delegation examined his passport in turn. After a long journey, the appearance of the document left much to be desired, but the page with the marriage registration and the birth certificate were still intact. "I don't understand anything." The psychologist stretched out. "How did we miss it?" "But I understand everything," Vincent said and grabbed his passport. He suddenly felt empowered. "Get out of the way, don't you see? The child is tired and wants to rest." The man moved the school delegation with what seemed to him to be a slight movement of his hand. In fact, they parted on their own. Vincent let Laurel pass, glanced over his shoulder. He was about to close the door, but then he thought it would be polite to be polite. "We're a normal family," he said. Normal. Just leave it alone, that's all. Be happy."